So welcome to tonight's Planning and Development Control Committee meeting. My name is Nikos Souslous. I'm the chair of the committee. Just to remind all participants a few housekeeping points. The meeting is being live streamed to the Council's YouTube channel, and by participating, you are consenting to being recorded. If the fire alarm sounds, please leave the meeting in an orderly fashion by the nearest exit, which is through the doors on the right and out the main entrance. As I said, toilets can be found at the back of the room on my left. And please can officers and all our speakers introduce themselves before speaking for the first time. And everyone make sure you use your microphone. If you don't know how to do that, we'll happily show you. We move on to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. We have apologies from Councillor Stray, Councillor Nemo, and Councillor Painter. And we, on item 2, declaration of interest, we also have apologies for lateness from Councillor Borland. And item 2, declaration of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest? Councillor Walsh.
Not so much a declaration of interest, but just a point of clarification. I am the ward councillor for Ravenscourt. However, I have maintained throughout this process that as a member of this committee, I must remain neutral. I just want that to be noted.
Thank you very much. If that can be noted, thank you. And item 3 are the minutes.
Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry. Just on behalf of Councillor Borland, I know that she's written to you, Charles, but she will be declaring a conflict of interest for Ravenscourt Hospital and will be recusing herself on those 2 items.
Okay, so yes, just to emphasize that point, Councillor Borland will have a pecuniary interest and she will not be able to participate in the meeting or indeed to vote on that item. Thank you for that, Councillor Pascoe-Tilbury. And item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of July 2025. Are the minutes of the previous meeting agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. So, as I said, we have a slight change in the order of items. So, especially given Councillor Borland's interest, we will be taking item 5 and item 6 first, and then we'll move on to the laundry side item. So that means we move straight on to item 5, which is Ravenscourt Park Hospital. And I would like to ask the presenting officer, Sinead Winship-David, to introduce the item with a presentation. That will cover both items and we'll have 2 separate votes. Sorry, I would also like to draw attention to the to the addendum, which includes, amongst other changes, late representations that have come from residents, including summaries of statements for those that submitted them that couldn't attend. Sinead, it's over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Sinead Winship-David. I'm Deputy Team Leader for Strategic Applications Team and the Planning Case Officer for Ravenscourt Park Hospital, along with my colleague, Isenka Ozdalga. As the Chair mentioned, this presentation will cover 2 items, an application for full planning permission and an application for listed building consent. As set out, there are 2 separate reports with the separate recommendations here, but this presentation will cover the matters to be considered for both applications. So the application, very briefly, it seeks planning permission and listed building consent for the conversion of the Grade 2 star listed Ravenscourt Park Hospital and the demolition and partial demolition. It will create 140 residential units, a 65-bed care home, and 21 affordable units. A little bit of a lag there. So here's some aerial views of the site. So the site is immediately adjacent to Ravenscourt Park. It's shown edged in red here on this image. Tennis courts here to the north, and there's various residential roads in the immediate vicinity of the site. It's also worth pointing out here that there was a partially private road here, Ravenscourt Square, and the Chiswick Nursing Centre is here where my cursor is. So I appreciate that's not showing up so well. I believe this has also been shared with members for reference, a printout. So this plan shows the various block letters that we'll be referring to throughout the presentation, and it also is quite helpful in providing the context, the local roads surrounding the site, and the addresses for the residential units, which again we will be discussing during this presentation. This very briefly just shows the existing key vehicular routes in and around the site. And this image shows the 2 conservation areas. The application site itself is within the Ravenscourt and Starch Green conservation area. And you can see to the south there is the Westcroft Square conservation area. And here labelled are the designated heritage assets. So as mentioned earlier, the hospital building itself, blocks A to D, are grade 2 star listed. Block E is not listed. And there are various grade 2 listed buildings within the immediate vicinity of the site as shown on this plan. So to further introduce the proposals in terms of the uses, the existing extant lawful use of the site is a hospital. The hospital has been vacant since 2006. It was briefly used for a period of 4 years by the NHS after the Royal Masonic Hospital vacated and sold the site. The NHS services were subsequently relocated to Charing Cross Hospital, also within the borough, and despite various planning permissions being granted for the refurbishment of the hospital for use by a private operator, there has been no interest in re-establishing the hospital use on site. So we are satisfied, given that the NHS services that were very briefly provided there have been relocated within the borough, that there is no ongoing demonstrable need for the hospital at this location, and therefore we can accept the loss of the hospital in principle. But it is, it should be noted that it does remain, despite it having been vacant for 19 years, it does remain the lawful use of the site, and it is an unfettered use. There are no restrictions on the use whatsoever in terms of hours, noise, anything that we would normally see if we were to grant such permission today. So below are the proposed uses. So there is a 65-bed care home proposed. We don't have final details of the exact type of care that would be proposed, just that it would fall within class C2, and that there is, and that that it would be capable of providing all levels of care up to the highest level of need. And having consulted with our colleagues in adult social care, they have confirmed that there is a shortfall in the borough for these beds. There's also 140 units of residential units proposed. Of these, 21 would be affordable. I'll come on later to the affordable offer and what is secured there. And then finally, within Block A, the historic administration block of the hospital, a flexible cultural and community use is proposed there. And that would also include a small cafe within the lobby area to the ground floor, and to help attract people into the historic building.
Sorry, if you could just speak into the microphone a bit louder, just so that everyone bring it a bit closer, just so that everyone, is it on, actually?
It is now. It was.
Okay.
So moving on to the proposed master plan, you'll see here, Block A, there were originally pavilion extensions proposed. We'll come on later to the amendments that we have gone through throughout the application process. There are roof level extensions proposed to Block B, C, D, single story to Block B and C, 2-story to Block D, and it's further proposed to demolish Block E and to create a new building, Block E and Block F. Block E will contain the affordable housing, and block F would be the care home use. And you'll see in green, block A, which is where the community and cultural uses are proposed. And then this image here shows the extent of demolition proposed. So this is block E. It's proposed that this will be demolished. This is not listed. And I'll pass to my colleague, Alan Jones, to discuss the demolition further.
Thanks, Sinead. So the demolition of block E has obviously been subject to a lot of representations from local residents. So just to go through this as a bit of a preamble to the principle of demolition. So the photographs on the screen show the current block E arrangement. So this covers in the bottom left-hand corner the raised walkway that links block B and block D to the later surgical ward, which was again developed in the 1970s. This block in its own right has been subject to a request for listing back in autumn 2024, which was rejected by Historic England on the basis that although the block does have some significance, it doesn't meet the bar to actually warrant statutory designation as part of the wider campus, and again reaffirms what the original list description and its revisions as part of later revisions has taken place. I think it's just worthwhile to note on this as well, some of the objections that have come forward also refer to whether partial retrofit options have been brought forward. Again, we can go into this a lot more in detail in the question if needed, but the key elements of this are that because this is quite a bespoke building format, the actual floor slab of the building plus the floor to ceiling height and the cores don't necessarily warrant themselves to amendment to an alternative use. And as a consequence of that, any interventions there will be quite radical. Again, in terms of just considering this in terms of the potential significance, those changes would be quite significant to really kind of fundamentally change the format of that block, but also would introduce quite a difficult structural engineering solution to actually ensure that the fabric of the building could be potentially partially retrofitted at the superstructure level. As a consequence of that, officers considered on balance that the right approach is to take forward demolition and a rebuild of this block. And as you'll see in the addendum and also in the main body of the report, there are provisions there about reuse of materials arising from the demolition and where they will be either used on site or off site as part of potential mitigation of carbon overall.
So as noted in the committee report, there has been a lot of interest from local residents, including the additional objections and representations that are noted in the addendum, which I bring members' attention to. We have sought to address not only residents' concerns as far as we can, but also the concerns of various amenity groups, including Historic England and the 20th Century Society. And as part of that process, the scheme has changed over time. So you'll see the originally submitted scheme in November 2023. There was additional massing to blocks E and F, the plant enclosure, and also the roof level pavilion extensions to block A. So the extensions to block A were of particular concern to Historic England, 20th Century Society, and they were removed in response to those objections. And both amenity groups have confirmed that they no longer object to the proposals as a result of that removal. And we further sought the revisions to block E and F to help with the visual impact of the scheme and to reduce how it appears visually when viewed from neighbouring properties. This again is just an image that shows the removal of those front pavilion extensions at roof level. And this shows the changes over time to block E and F. So there's been change to materiality and the detailed design and the removal of the rooftop plant. And that is in response, again, to comments by residents, officers and amenity groups, and the applicant has revised the scheme accordingly. I'll now move on to highways matters. So again, this is an area where we're very aware of local concerns and concerns that when the initial scheme was submitted were very much shared by officers, and we have worked hard to secure amendments to the scheme to mitigate the impact and to really reduce the trip generation of the proposals. So to the rear of the site is Ravenscourt Square. Now, this is a partially privately owned road. It falls within the red line of the application. So it forms part of the site boundary. It is under the ownership of the applicant. However, there are various rights of access granted over this road through easements, so outside of the planning process, but there are various legal rights to access over this road, which would have to be retained regardless of any planning permission that may or may not come forward here. So at the moment, the road, despite being private, we understand it is used quite regularly as a cut through by vehicles that aren't attending the Chiswick Nursing Centre, and it's also used by pedestrians and cyclists as a cut through, and that is something that we are absolutely seeking to retain, that permeability for cyclists and pedestrians. It is the only vehicular access to the Chiswick Nursing Centre, and given the level of care that is provided at the Chiswick Nursing Centre, there are frequent ambulances attending the site. Officers have attended meetings with the nursing centre to fully understand exactly what their needs are, the level of vehicle movements to the road, to ensure that we have a full picture of the proposals and what needs to be done to ensure that there would be no reason that ambulances would be blocked or otherwise inhibited. So in the table that just shows the existing total vehicles during the AM peak and the PM peak along Ravenscourt Square. So this is the scheme that was initially submitted to us in November 2023. So this scheme, it included a basement car park that was accessed, again, my cursor isn't very clear, but it was accessed from here, and that was private residential parking accessed via car lifts. This was something of particular concern to officers, given the limited capacity of Ravenscourt Square, given that this should be a car-free scheme in line with policy, and there were also various other concerns regarding how this could feasibly and safely be used by residents. So the below table shows, again, AM, PM peak flow that was predicted to be generated when prior to the scheme becoming car-free. And you'll note that also in the next slide that more work has been done to create a safer environment for pedestrians and cyclists, whilst also allowing for ambulances and the servicing needs of the nursing centre and the proposed care home on site to be met adequately. So through the removal of the car park for residents, this is estimated to have removed 109 two-way trips each day. The table below shows the AM and PM peak flows, so obviously it doesn't show the full 109, but just for the purposes of comparison, see that there was a meaningful reduction in vehicle numbers as a result of this amendment. The applicant has engaged meaningfully with the existing nursing centre to ensure that they will still have adequate spaces for their own servicing needs, ambulances, and the staff parking, which is, again, that's secured through a separate legal agreement, not through planning, but there's a requirement for them to provide that. And we also secured a servicing bay and an ambulance bay for the nursing home that is proposed now. Again, this is just emphasising the impact of the removal of the car park, and this was really in a direct response both to officers' concerns and residents' concerns about increased vehicular movements along Ravenscourt Gardens, Ravenscourt Square, and officers agreed that there would be real harm caused by allowing this increase in cars attending the site daily. So this is very briefly the revised parking strategy, again just showing that although the scheme is car-free and that there is no residential general needs parking, there is, as shown in blue in the bottom left corner here, there is still provision for blue badge parking for residents and those visiting Block A. And furthermore, this removes the use of Ravenscourt Square and encourages vehicles to go back to Ravenscourt Park, which was the historic entrance for the building. And this is another area where we secured amendments in response both to officer and resident concerns. So as originally proposed, the delivery and servicing of the site, it was all proposed to go through Ravenscourt Square, and officers made clear that was not acceptable, and instead you'll see in the blue line here, the deliveries for the residential, servicing for the residential will all go through Ravenscourt Park. And then at the top here, there is the refuse collection, which will still go along Ravenscourt Square. And then that is the vehicular route through, which is again retained by legal rights separate to planning. And then finally, moving on to demolition and construction logistics. Again, officers very much shared the concerns of residents about the number of construction vehicles using Ravenscourt Square, and made clear that Ravenscourt Park should be the primary entrance, the primary route through, and Ravenscourt Square should be used only if Ravenscourt Park cannot be used for a specific physical obstruction, really. So the outline construction logistics plan does commit to using Ravenscourt Park as far as possible. And we will secure a final construction logistics plan, and we will ensure that it does reflect what has been set out to us in the outline construction logistics plan. Just to bring to members' attention, there are various mechanisms within the committee report that would secure community engagement and liaison with local residents prior to the submission of any construction logistics plan or demolition logistics plan. And there is also a requirement for a community liaison group secured through condition 3, which will require meetings at a minimum quarterly with local residents throughout the demolition and construction periods. Okay, and I will pass again to my colleague Alan to discuss the heritage and design.
Thank you, Sinead. So just to reiterate, going back to the kind of earlier preamble, so the hospital complex itself is grade 2-star listed. It's been vacant since 2006. And again, there are 4 key components to the grade 2-star listing, which are laid out here. There's also in that handout I've given to members just a reference of each of those blocks that we'll go through in detail. Can we go on to the next slide? Sorry, just a few photographs just for kind of a snapshot of this. So the images on the left-hand side cover off the building when it was in functional use as a hospital, and shows obviously some of the key spaces internally, which were again of a high quality and really give the character and significance that gives justification towards the grade 2-star listing. The photographs on the right-hand side show the current condition of the building. And as again is referenced in the report, this is on the heritage at risk register, but is considered to be quite a low priority in terms of the heritage at risk items, given the fact the building's in kind of a stable condition. There isn't any significant deterioration, and also the building is watertight and weatherproof as well. So it isn't something where we've had to go in and take urgent works or any kind of remedial actions when the developer has acquired the site, they've undertaken some remedial actions themselves to ensure that the building is enclosed through suitable security, and some water egress into part of the site has already been dealt with as well. So just going through then the next stages. So I think we've tried to make the presentation as consolidated as we can for the purposes of the discussion today. There is a lot of detail that sits behind this, and just to give members an overview as to the detail that we've gone into. So the heritage statement submitted in support of the application includes a set of drawings that show the significance of each individual block. These are referenced and colour-coded in terms of areas in red being the highest significance and areas in blue being negligible significance. Again, this is then supported by photographic records of those features as we go through the individual blocks. And that's then informed the strategy that's undertaken on each individual block, each individual floor, in terms of the changes that come forward to the scheme. So just on the next extract here, this covers off again just the detail that the method statements cover off for each individual block. So they go through what works are proposed to the external facades of the buildings, to replacement of windows and doors or retention. And then on the floor plans also go through internal elements which will either be retained, replaced, or repaired as we go forward. So all of this is considered through the method statement. Again, if we would have gone through them in totality, we would have been here for hours. So it's just a snapshot to show that this is what's been considered, and again is conditions as part of the scheme. And just again for members' reference, and again it's referenced in the report, this detail has been subject to external independent scrutiny by heritage consultants to ensure that the works are considered to be of a suitable nature to ensure full restoration of the building back to its former glory, really. So just a preamble, just to explain, there is a lot more detail behind this in the conditions that are suggested if planning consent and listed building consent is granted today. So just to go through the overview of the scheme, again, this is a heritage-led scheme, as I've just mentioned. A lot of the original fabric of the building is to be restored sensitively with interventions as part of the conversion to residential use, undertaken in quite a sensitive manner as we go through the individual blocks. As Sinead mentioned earlier on, the revisions to the scheme have secured some of the most problematic parts of the scheme have been omitted, particularly in terms of Block A and the rooftop pavilions, and also in terms of the rooftop plant and enclosures to Block E and F. But this is just a summary of the key interventions for each block, really, which we'll go through in detail now. Again, you've got a copy of this just as we go through this of the master plan, but we'll just go through each block in turn. So Block A, again, is the most significant block as part of the campus itself. This again was the kind of the lavish administrative block where all kind of, the management functions and public events were held. And again, is the most significant part of the campus. The interventions proposed here are quite minimal in nature, and then mainly to allow for the community use to be brought into consideration. So it's largely soft features such as, furniture, installations for the spaces. Again, more restoration to enable those public functions to come into play. And some of the internal subdivision works have been changed through the consideration of proposals to limit the amount of interventions in those areas of high significance. Also at ground floor, there is provision of a secondary, can we just point onto the access? So there's a secondary inclusive access that's now provided against the main entrance to the scheme, which is stepped access, so that all members of the community can actually access the community functions within the building. Okay, so on to Block B. So Block B, again, there are changes to the building. This is again of a high significance because of the nature of the previous hospital use and the nature of care that was provided, particularly some of the elements, the external landscape courtyard and the external balconies were intended as part of the original use of the building, really promoting health and well-being through access to, to the air, and really kind of trying to encourage that kind of rehabilitation. So all those features remain, but as part of the proposals, the key elements are the installation of rooftop additions, which have been, sorry, can we just go on to the next one, which have been sensitively designed to align with the kind of consideration of the main blocks of the building, and again, a lightweight and contrast in their construction to enable the kind of reading of those separate to the main form of the building. The other key interventions as part of the Block B considerations are the installation of additional cores to the rear of the block to allow for the conversion to residential. So these are the elements to both the top and bottom of the right-hand side of the image on the screen, and also some changes to the plan form to facilitate the conversion to residential use. Again, these are considered to be taken on board the historic significance drawings, interventions which are as minimal as they need to be to allow the residential conversion to take place. Notwithstanding that, in terms of those conversions and those elements, they are considered to result in some harm to the significance of the building, which as officers we conclude to be less than substantial harm, to the lower end of the spectrum of that harm for this block. And if we just go on to the next page, so this just shows a few images of the scheme showing the restored building fabric at lower levels and the lightweight upper floor additions to Block B, both in terms of the main U-shaped courtyard frontage block and then a slightly less prominent rooftop addition to the link block with Block A. And again, as part of the proposals we'll come on to later, they do include full restoration of the landscape courtyard, which again is part of the high significance of the building overall. Block C and D, again, have high significance and again are listed as part of the Grade 2 star listing. Again, the internal modifications here are generally to facilitate the change of use to the residential uses. And they are again complemented with some info extensions at the link between Block B and C. So the area to the centre of the image on the left-hand side. And then again, rooftop additions up the floor to both blocks, again, to facilitate additional residential accommodation. Again, the cores to this block are modified to allow for the residential conversion. And within Block C, as you can see on the ground floor here on the left-hand side image, this covers a concierge to the main form of the building to facilitate the new residential use, and to the western portion of that block, also provision of cycle storage in a dedicated location. So again, just a summary of those interventions, and again, the harm to this block is considered again to be less than substantial harm, again at the lower end of less than substantial harm overall. Again, just some visualizations just to show the qualities of those. So as I mentioned, the kind of infill blocks on Block C, linking with Block B to the left-hand side of the image on the left, and Block D to the right-hand side, are generally glazed. They have a different look and feel to the main brick form of the building to differentiate them, as to the upper floor rooftop elements to both blocks, which complement the existing building form, but obviously gives some degree of contrast so that you can allow the reading of both being independent overall. The final part of the building, in terms of the new build blocks, the new Block C and F, now again, as we mentioned in the preamble, that does result in the loss of the existing Block E and replacement with this L-shaped block, which includes the care home to the foreground image that you can see here, and then the general residential block to the eastern extent. We'll just talk through briefly the plans, because I think Sinead mentioned this again as part of the highway considerations. So the image to the left shows the consolidated basement that's now included within the scheme for Block C and F. That has been modified substantively to omit vehicular parking within this element and consolidate that really to the fabric underneath the block F consolidated element. Again, the two blocks in the blue covers off the residential care home, and the yellow covers off the general accommodation. And then again, just a typical upper floor plan that again just shows the layout of both blocks. It's helpful to understand that the block fronting onto the northern extent of the site does step back at the upper floor levels as well. As you can see here, that there is a substantive setback when you get to the roof plan, which includes provision of additional photovoltaics and green roof infrastructure. So the architectural character of Block C and F has been subject to significant revisions again through both pre-application and the application stage submissions. And I think this again has been through positive dialogue with the amenity groups, particularly the Hammersmith Society and the Hammersmith and Fulham Historic Buildings Group, who've been consulted on the proposal. So the intention is that the format of the buildings tries to complement the format of Block D, but kind of have a contemporary expression that really kind of sets it aside as part of a new build on the campus. The blocks are incorporated with recessed balconies, red detailed soffits that seek to emulate the tone and contrast and materiality of the main block, but then the main building form being in detailed brickwork seeks to try and bring forward some contrast to ensure that the new build elements do read as separate elements to the historic fabric. And again, just to be clear on this, the images that we'll go through in a second in terms of some of the townscape views, the northern and western facades are treated in, a northern facade as well, are treated in more lighter coloured tone brickwork, with the internal northern and eastern facades treated in a green brickwork tone, really to try and emulate kind of more of the landscape character of the park this sits within the views of, really. If we just go on to the next one. So again, these are just some of the key images of that block. So on the left-hand side, you've got the existing Block E shown within the view, and then the updated proposals for Block E and F on the right-hand side. And again, this is a wider shot of the same image, just showing again the landscape character and the group of locally listed and Grade 2 listed properties that form Ravenscourt Square to the northern extent. I think it's helpful just to understand again that the new build block would puncture above the skyline of the roofscape of those existing properties, and as such, that's why we've concluded that there will be some harm to the setting of those properties overall. And again, we'll come on to the mitigation we feel justifies warranting granting of consent in this instance. And then just the final view of these two blocks again is the scheme again from Ravenscourt Park and the football pitches adjacent to the terraces that flank either side of the hospital campus. So again, just showing the impact of the revised proposals against the existing Block E, and really kind of I suppose the illustrative material in terms of why the green brickwork's been chosen to try and really naturalise this block within its setting, really. Again, as I mentioned before, in terms of the landscaping and boundary treatments, this has been subject to substantive review with the details provided showing that really that the kind of landscape courtyard to the internal environment of Block B can be fully restored, and also that the setting of Block A adjacent to Ravenscourt Park will be enhanced against the current condition. There are also proposals for existing trees to be retained. One existing mature copper beech tree sitting within the rear environment of Block E would be resituated, and there would also be 43 new replacement trees proposed as part of the overall landscape strategy. So just going through as a summary of all of that in the round, really. So we've concluded overall that there are 4 elements of harm to adjacent and the heritage assets that form part of the site designation alongside the conservation area. In all instances, we concluded that harm is less than substantial harm, and again to the low end of the range of less than substantial harm in this instance. So in terms of the approach that we have to take, we have to look at this in the round in terms of what the heritage benefits of the scheme are that serve to outweigh that harm in terms of our statutory duties and the elements of preserving and enhancing the conservation area. So just to go through these, what we consider the key benefits to be. So the former hospital site is part of the intrinsic and fundamental significance of the Ravenscourt and Starch Green conservation area. Again, because the campus is also listed at grade 2 star, the bringing back of the existing buildings back into a viable use is considered to be a substantive heritage benefit that would not only enable that to be removed off the heritage at risk register, but enable the building to be preserved. And again, some of the issues that we've discussed before to be resolved, the building be brought back into constant use and management. The internal repairs, again, have been subject to external scrutiny and again are considered to be reasonable to enable the full restoration of the building. The enhanced landscape setting, including the new planting and reinstated landscape features, again, are considered to be a fundamental heritage benefit to the conservation area and to the campus as a whole. And again, improving the access to the campus through routes and connections for pedestrians, but also through the community uses now proposed in Block A is again considered to be a substantive heritage benefit of allowing public access to those areas of really high significance. And again, making sure that all the decorative features internally are restored. Beyond those heritage benefits, I think it's also worthwhile mentioning that in terms of the quality of extensions and the new build, we do feel that is a high quality, which warrants the reduction in terms of the scale of harm that's been presented in the summary that we've made. So we have taken on board the fact that design quality is, a positive element in terms of those extensions. It's well thought out. The details obviously will be sought by condition for materiality, but the general principles are deemed to be a well thought out and high quality scheme overall.
Right, so moving on to neighbouring amenity impacts. So this shows a massing model of the scheme as proposed with the surrounding contextual buildings. So again, as we've sort of just spoken to before, there are roof extensions to blocks B, C and D. And there is, of course, the new build blocks E and F that will replace the block E that is to be demolished. And then this is just again to show how the massing to block E has been reduced and the extensions have been removed. This is the massing of the building as existing. So I would direct members' attention in particular to the proximity of block E to the properties on Ravenscourt Square here. It's an extremely limited setback here. But as a preamble, before I get into any of the real detail about the neighbouring amenity impacts, I would just highlight to members that the scheme is fully compliant with BRE criteria with regard to daylight, sunlight and overshadowing. All relevant properties have been assessed. The applicant submitted a revised daylight sunlight assessment in response to comments by neighbours highlighting inconsistencies with their own internal floor plans. So the daylight sunlight assessment was updated to address that and also to assess first floor level terrace that had also been inadvertently missed in the assessment. And again, it was fully BRE compliant. So officers are very comfortable with the retained levels of daylight and sunlight. The properties will all continue to benefit from very good levels of daylight and sunlight where they already do. And yeah, it's not often that we do see a scheme that is able to, we're able to confidently say it's fully compliant with BRE criteria, but that is the case here. So moving on to assessing the properties along Ravenscourt Square and the impact upon them as a result of the development. So again, bringing members' attention to the proximity of Block E to the properties along Ravenscourt Square. And the existing separation distances. So again, as this view, there is, a blank facade really that comes right up almost against the rear boundaries of number 17 here, and very, very limited setbacks. Under 9 meters to the rear elevation of number 17, and sort of circa 4 to 4.5 meter setback from the rear boundaries of the properties along Ravenscourt Square. And this shows the setbacks as now proposed. So again, to number 7, so the ground floor plan, which is 3 stories in height, that is pulled back by around about 1 meter from the rear boundary of number 17 and to the other properties along Ravenscourt Square. And then where there is the taller element, the 4th and the 5th stories, a substantial setback really has been incorporated here, which is sort of 22.5 meters from the rear elevation of the relevant properties. Given the presence of the existing building, Block E, the setbacks incorporated and the detailed design, officers would state in their assessment that this is sufficient to mitigate against any overbearing or sense of enclosure impacts that for those residents of those properties. And again, this is just showing the view as proposed, again, from more or less that same vantage point, but just showing again that there's a setback here. I would just emphasize that these windows here are treated with stained glass, and there is also a condition that requires that they are suitably obscure glazed, non-opening, to prevent any loss of amenity or privacy and overlooking issues here. And this it looks like it's bifolding doors, but it's glazing. And this again, although it looks like there is a terrace here, it's a green roof, and a condition requires that this area can only be accessed for maintenance purposes. It's not an amenity space. It will not be accessible for residents of the care home. As we fully appreciate that would result in unacceptable additional impacts. So we have secured relevant conditions there. Moving on to the 20 to 23 Ravenscourt Park. So again, I've included an existing plan showing the existing setbacks from relevant vantage points between the existing buildings and the buildings, the homes on Ravenscourt Park. One of the key concerns is the impact of this existing terrace to Block A, which is shown here. Now, this is to the first floor and is accessed from one of the 2 committee wing rooms that are proposed to become part of the community and cultural use here. This is a historic part of the building, and there is access to it, and we have secured conditions that would restrict hours of access and prevent amplified noise, music, to minimise as far as we can within what controls we have within planning to mitigate impacts upon residents. So again, just showing the existing relationship between these buildings and the properties along Ravenscourt Park. And also this is the terrace here to Block A that I was just talking about. And then this here is the proposed relationship. So again, there are substantial setbacks from the rear elevations of the properties where there are roof level extensions proposed. Given the setbacks that have been incorporated and the distance from the rear elevations, officers are comfortable that this would not result in an unduly harmful impact on overbearing impacts, sensitive enclosure to residents. Whilst it's accepted that the extensions would be visible, them being visible is not in itself harm. It would be, making sure that they are not unduly overbearing, sensitive enclosure, loss of outlook, and given the setbacks, we are comfortable with that arrangement. And again, as originally proposed, there were the upper floor terrace and pavilions proposed to Block A to the second floor, and those have been removed to help hopefully further reduce the impact on these properties that could be affected. So moving on to the properties on Ravenscourt Gardens, there are existing balconies to two of the blocks, so blocks B and block C, sort of curved balconies that were part of the original hospital use and accessed from what were wards. These balconies, again, they do allow for a degree of overlooking into the existing properties, which is accepted by officers that there would be overlooking. These balconies are intended to be private amenity spaces for residents of individual units. They would not be communal amenity spaces. They wouldn't be associated with the commercial use. They would be private amenity spaces for residents of individual units. So in looking at what we could do to mitigate impacts on the residents of Ravenscourt Gardens as a result of the reuse of these balconies, various options were tested, and what we had to consider was the heritage impacts of interventions to these balconies, given the significance of the balconies. So these are the various options that were tested, ultimately determined to not be appropriate solutions. And the final proposal is what we have now. There is a low glazed balustrade, and to be clear, this isn't intended as an intervention to help with the amenity impacts. It's to do with safety for those who are using the terraces. And in terms of, obviously, because again, we're somewhat limited in our planning powers in what we can do here to make introduce additional screening. So the proposals are that there would be a line of additional planting trees to provide some level of additional screening, and that is, in our view, the best solution available to us within the powers we have under planning. And again, this is just some examples of the trees when mature. Distances, so again, whether our extensions proposed. So these are the separation distances proposed, and again, you'll see that where extensions are proposed, there is a very substantial setback from the rear elevations of the properties of Ravenscourt Gardens. Alan's already touched upon the open space from the heritage perspective. So from the planning perspective, there'll be a series of gardens. There will be public access through the site to increase the site permeability during daylight hours. I think 7 till 7 is proposed. There'll be a a garden for the care home in addition to the various communal gardens across the site, and there will be play space, and a condition has ensured that the play space will be accessible to all residents of the site regardless of the tenure of their home. And again, Alan has covered this in terms of the trees and proposals around tree retention, removal and reprovision. So very briefly, the energy strategy. So the applicant worked with us on this. We asked that the PV array was maximised, all possible locations for PV panels were utilised, and that reduced the CO2 emissions by a further 11%. So what we have is a scheme that performs very well against policy. Policy requires 35% reduction in emissions beyond Part L. To be achieved on site. Here we have a 67% reduction, which is, very positive given that this is a refurbishment of a historic building. And to get to net zero, we have secured a carbon offsetting contribution of £241,080, which will be finalised subject to the submission of the final energy strategy should it not perform as well as initially indicated. Very briefly, these are an indicative residential layout to the historic blocks. The proposed units, again, they perform very well against BRE criteria. They receive very good levels of daylight and sunlight. All units meet or exceed the nationally described space standard as required by the London plans. So they're generously sized units, well lit. The heritage significance of the historic blocks precludes the attachment of some additional balconies for private amenity space. However, the residents will have access to very generous communal amenity spaces through the gardens to be provided across the site. And this is the indicative layout for the Block E. And again, units perform very well against BRE criteria, meet or exceed the nationally described space standard, and each would have private amenity space. And again, these are sufficiently set back from the properties that they would be facing to ensure that there is no unduly harmful level of mutual overlooking, and they would have privacy, as would residents. So moving on to affordable housing. So the applicant submitted a financial viability assessment. This was subject to extensive review by the council's independent viability consultants. So we secured 21 units of affordable housing on site, which is 13 social rented units and 8 London living rent units, which are intermediate tenure. And those would all be provided within Block E, and that is in line with the preferences of housing associations, registered providers who have a significant preference for all affordable units provided within one block, and they would rather not share a call. And in addition to this, we secured a 2.7 million payment in lieu towards the delivery of off-site affordable housing. So this would deliver between approximately 9 and 12 off-site units, which brings us to a total overall affordable offer of between 21 and 24%, which is between 30 and 33 affordable homes delivered. We accept that this is below the policy requirement. However, this has been a scheme that has been subject to rigorous viability testing. We, we did explore options to allow for additional affordable housing to be delivered. However, unfortunately, on the site, there are multiple constraints that prevent, the answer isn't as simple as it may be on others to simply just go higher. If the new build blocks were to go higher, there would be further impacts upon viability that might not actually allow for any more additional affordable housing to be delivered. There is the heritage element of the scheme as well. And we have to ensure that what we are securing is a very high quality restoration of the building to ensure that we are not resulting in a level of harm that can't be supported. And then finally, moving on to the heads of terms. So, well, in terms of what we haven't covered already, we have our standard employment and skills and funding towards Upstream London initiatives. Community use of Block A will be secured at a discounted rate. We have kept that flexible in terms of the users and uses, as long as they are community and cultural, to allow for ongoing engagement with our economic development team to help identify users to make sure that it makes a genuinely positive contribution. There's also the carbon offsetting, as mentioned previously. If the relocation of the tree mentioned in the report and in the presentation, if it fails for any reason, we are securing basically a financial contribution to allow for the mitigation of that through, be it off-site planting, on-site planting, to ensure that there would be no overall harm to the environment as a result of the loss of that tree. But to be clear, that is only if, after attempting to transplant the tree, it fails. The heritage heads of terms are listed there. And then in terms of highways, very quickly, so we have secured Section 278 works to the highways, and that is to comprise public realm improvements between the site and Ravenscourt Park, and also improvements to either end of Ravenscourt Square, where it changes from being public highway to private highway, and that is to enhance safety for pedestrians and cyclists through measures that would slow down vehicles. The surrounding area is covered by a controlled parking zone. Residents will not be eligible to apply for parking permits, and the developer will also be liable to pay to fund a review by the council of the existing CPZ restrictions. And if they are determined to need to be extended to mitigate against impacts of the development, the developer will also be liable for the costs of that. The Demolition and Construction Community Working Group, as mentioned earlier, who will need to be engaged prior to the submission of any DLP, CLP, and that will need to be ongoing and ongoing working with the community, and also securing pedestrian and cyclist access through Ravenscourt Square in perpetuity, as it is a private road. And then finally, there are the monitoring fees. So that is the end of my presentation. So officers do recommend that planning permission and listed building consent be granted in line with the recommendations made at the start of the requisite reports. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for very detailed marathon presentation. That's been very helpful. We now move on to speakers. We have three objectors sharing 10 minutes between them. We have Nedda Vakilian, Stephen Walker, and Emma Leslie Melville. If you're here, if you'd like to come to the top table. Are they here? Oh, is it Mr. Walker? Yes, if you'd like to take a seat. If the others are not here, that would mean you have 10 minutes to yourself. If you can do it lower than 10 minutes, we would also be very grateful, but it's up to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I'll do my best to keep it under 10 minutes. I hope everyone can hear me. I've got a bit of a cold. I'm sorry about that. Yesterday, I sent the committee members a short PowerPoint document summarising the points that I wanted to make this evening. I don't know whether or not you've had the opportunity to look at that, but I'm going to use that as my framework for my brief representations. I'll also pick up some of the points that the officers have made this evening. As I've said in my presentation, the Residents' Association of Ravenscourt Square, on whose behalf I speak, have no difficulty, no objection with the change of use to the hospital and do not oppose the redevelopment in principle. The objections that were raised related to access and to blocks E and F. I'm grateful to the officers for the progress that they've made in relation to access, which they outlined to you this evening, which appears to deal with the concerns that were raised by the residents in relation to the use of Ravenscourt Square as the principal means of access and egress to the site. However, in relation to blocks E and F, there has, I'm sorry to say, been very little progress since this development was first mooted several years ago. And all that we want as residents is that the development respects the fact it's in a conservation area and complies with Hammersmith and Fulham's own guidelines. And I'm sorry to say that at the moment it does not do so. As you've seen on the slides earlier, Ravenscourt Square consists of 2- and 3-storey houses. The particular houses that are most affected by blocks E and F are numbers 9 to 17, which sit on the south side of the square, adjacent to the northern perimeter of the hospital. 3 of those houses are designated as buildings of merit. One of them is grade 2 listed. So they are significant properties locally. As you've seen from the slides we looked at earlier, Block F will, as the officer said, puncture the skyline. I thought that was rather a good way of putting it. Block F will puncture the skyline behind numbers 9 to 17, and that cannot be avoided by the use of different coloured bricks. The fact is, the roofline and the townscape that currently exists will be destroyed, and that is not consistent with preserving a conservation area. It's flatly inconsistent with it. So far as Block E is concerned, using greenish coloured bricks will not make Block E invisible. The fact that the officers recognise the need to attempt to camouflage the building is, I would suggest, a tacit acknowledgement of the impact, the harmful impact that the building will have, comprising as it does a new 5-storey, 20-metre plus building in a location where presently there is no such building. There are simply effectively trees and a much smaller existing building. So the impact of Block E can't be ignored. Can't be ignored either. So that's blocks E and F and their impact in outline. Considering first then the fact that these proposed buildings are in a conservation area, I would suggest that blocks E and F would be overbearing and discordant. The Hammersmith Society called them incongruous, and the officers accept that they would cause harm to the amenity of the conservation area, but they say that in their view it's less than substantial harm. Defining substantial harm is a rather subjective exercise, I would suggest. And I was interested to see the slide that compared harm with benefits, because that slide presupposes that without the harm, you don't get the benefits. And that is simply a non sequitur. It may be that you could build a development which did not adversely affect the conservation area and still get the heritage benefits and the other benefits that the officers have identified. So I don't accept that there is a necessary relationship between the harm that the officers accept blocks E and F would cause and the benefits. So far as the amenity of the local area is concerned, it's clear, I would suggest, that blocks E and F will cause harm to the amenity of the local area. The officers seem to accept that, but they say it's less than substantial. The less than substantial test is not good enough when it comes to local policy H07, which says that the council will support applications for specialist housing for older people, which is what Block F is, if it meets certain criteria, one of which is that the proposed development will not be detrimental to the amenity of the local area. It's not a question of balancing harm with benefits. It's a clear requirement, and Block F simply doesn't meet that policy requirement. And so if you were to allow the application as currently formulated, there would be an argument that you were not applying your own principles correctly. And that could, of course, give rise to arguments surrounding judicial review. Thirdly, the amenities of neighbouring properties. Policy H011 says that the council will ensure that the amenities of neighbouring properties are adequately protected. We looked at the models earlier that show the existing buildings and the proposed buildings. The proposed buildings will have an adverse effect on numbers 9 to 17 Ravenscourt Square, and I'll come on to one example of that in a minute. But one of the officers emphasised the fact that the existing buildings are in very close proximity to the rear of numbers 15 and 17 in the square. And she said that the developers had moved the proposed buildings further away from those properties. Well, that's true. They've been moved by the sum total of 1 metre. That's hardly a significant movement at all. Some emphasis was also placed on the fact that the part of Block F that's closest to numbers 15 and 17 is only 3 stories and then steps up to 5 stories. Well, that is correct, but the setback is very small indeed, and the distance from the rear of numbers 15 and 17 to the 5th floor of the buildings is only about 20 metres, which is very low for a building of some 20 metres in height. And it is puzzling that the officers didn't refer you to a planning application that was made in relation to number 15 Ravenscourt Square by the previous owner. I'm one of the current owners, because the council rejected an application by the previous owner to change the roof profile of number 15 on account of the harm it would cause to the visual amenity. So, private householder wants to add a 3rd floor above ground level to their house, and they're told they can't because the roof profile has to stay the same. A developer comes along, owned by an offshore trust in the British Virgin Islands, asking to build a 5-storey building, destroying or puncturing, to use the officer's language, the skyline, and that's okay. Doesn't seem to be particularly fair or equitable. So I said I'd identify an example of the effect, the adverse effect on neighbouring properties. The example is sunlight. And this is an important point because what the officers haven't told you in their report is that the analysis that they referred you to states in terms that there will be an adverse effect on the light available to numbers 9 to 17 Ravenscourt Square, with certain windows losing 16% of their sunlight and other windows losing a lower amount of sunlight. That is harm. The officer's answer to that is to say, well, the buildings will still have the amount of light required by the BRE guidelines, but the BRE guidelines are totally irrelevant to the question you have to answer. The BRE guidelines relate to how much light a new building needs. They don't relate to the question that you have to decide, which is whether or not the development will cause harm to neighbouring properties. It will. And the fact that neighbouring properties might still have the amount of light that the BRE deems sufficient is neither here nor there. So again, I'm afraid the officers are putting before you an irrelevant consideration in support of this application. There's an implication.
Sorry, because we're at 9.5 minutes, so if you'd like to wrap up shortly, thank you.
Thank you. So to wrap up, insofar as there's any suggestion that the development is not viable without these oversized, overbearing buildings, yesterday I requested and was provided with one of the viability reports prepared on behalf of the council, which provides a financial assessment of the income and expenditure that the project will entail. And amongst the expenditure is an allowance of in excess of £28 million profit for the developer. So there's ample headroom for this developer not to have 5-storey buildings blighting the neighbourhood. It's simply not necessary. And so what I would suggest is that if you are minded to approve the application, it should be subject to a condition that the buildings of blocks E and F, where they're currently proposed to be 5 stories, should be reduced as a minimum to 4 stories, so that 4 stories would be the maximum height allowed, because that would mitigate the harm the buildings would otherwise cause.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Thank you. If you'd like to turn the microphone off.
I will do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. We also have speakers in support of the application. And if they are in the room, we have Duncan Brisbane, Amit Doshi, and Oliver Jefferson. It's again 10 minutes between the three of you. If you want to have one, it's 10 minutes for you. And if you'd like to introduce yourself and the capacity you're here. Thank you.
It will just be me. Thank you. Good evening, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Duncan Brisbane. I'm the Development Director at TT Group, speaking on behalf of the applicant. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of our application to restore the former Royal Masonic Hospital at Ravenscourt Park, a valued Grade 2 star listed building of national importance that stood vacant for 2 decades. We acquired the property in 2022, and over the last 3 years, we have worked collaboratively with your officers, the local community and heritage groups to bring forward this carefully considered scheme, which will restore the listed building and deliver much needed new homes. We have worked with officers to maximise the affordable housing component of the scheme, which is a significant achievement in the context of the heritage constraints. The proposal would deliver a new care home, again meeting significant need, and open up the site and the impressive main entrance building, Block A, for public access. We've undertaken extensive engagement with ward councillors and officers at the council, Historic England, the Hammersmith Society, the Historic Buildings Group, and the Friends of Ravenscourt Park, and most importantly, our neighbours. We undertook a multi-stage consultation process, hosting several workshops with neighbours, drop-in events for the wider community, and individual meetings with local groups. This is a proposal shaped with and by stakeholders who have played a pivotal role in the design evolution process, and as a result of this feedback, significant changes were made to improve the relationship with neighbouring properties. As well as restoring the listed building, the outmoded 1978 Block E will be replaced with a new building that includes a specialist care home and high-quality affordable homes. Deliberately conceived to be read as part of the former hospital estate in order to complete the original vision, the new building has been sensitively designed to reflect the craftsmanship and quality of the former hospital blocks, whilst being appropriately located and scaled to minimise impacts on the surrounding residents. The heritage-led master plan and building design has been developed by a first-class design team led by Trevor Morris of Spark Architects. It has been designed in consultation with Historical England and local heritage groups. The proposed design will be sensitively remodel the retained heritage buildings into residential use, whilst enhancing public access through landscape areas and pedestrian routes. The overall goal is to preserve and honour the site's architectural and historical significance, while integrating it into the local community. The scheme is also highly sustainable. The proposal adopts an electric-only energy strategy, anchored by a site-wide ground source heat pump system, supplemented by photovoltaic panels. This approach enhances energy performance and limits rooftop plant, which is beneficial in both listed building terms and for neighbouring amenity. This development will deliver long-term benefits for both new and existing residents through the provision of flexible community space, which was overwhelmingly supported during consultation, and new public pedestrian routes that better connect the area. These are tangible enhancements for the local community, directly shaped by engagement with those who know the area best. To summarise, this proposal represents a rare opportunity to sensitively, sustainably, and inclusively regenerate a nationally important building that is currently on Historic England's Buildings at Risk register. It will address Hammersmith and Fulham's acute needs by delivering new market and affordable homes and elderly care accommodation. It will provide flexible community space in the most impressive part of the former hospital and improve connectivity to benefit the wider community. And it will restore and conserve this significant Grade 2 star listed building, including improvements to its setting through significant landscaping works. Ultimately, it delivers a scheme fit for the future, one that prioritises heritage and environmental objectives while ensuring lasting benefits for the local community. Thank you for your time, and I hope you will support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Brisbane, and thank you to everyone. now move on to committee members' questions to officers for clarification. Councillor Walsh, Ward Councillor, if you'd like to start us off.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Firstly, just a question, question to the heritage team there. Just on the drawings you supplied here, could you just distinguish between how you have distinguished Block A from Block B? As I look at Block A here on your drawings, Block A kind of forms into a corridor, which forms into a narrow corridor, which then connects to the extension itself. However, it would seem from your presentation that there seems to be a cut-off kind of midway through the first corridor. Can I just clarify, where does Block A actually end? The original historic Masonic architecture, Block A, and where does Block B begin?
Sorry, just waiting for the image. So just this is again the extract from Block B in terms of the significance drawing. So you're quite right in terms of the blocks are interconnected via as you can see on the left hand side of the image, a kind of a recessed or partially recessed link between the two. So they are linked, but there's kind of quite a clear differentiation in terms of the buildings themselves. I'm sure we can take out a photograph if needed. The reason that they're listed in slightly different ways is because of the different functions of those blocks. So where this link takes place, that then goes into the main kind of ward environment of the hospital. So there is a difference between the two. It is quite subtle in terms of the building, but when you walk around, it's quite evident in terms of when you're kind of transferring from one part of the building to the other because of the fixtures and fittings, etc. as you go through.
Thank you for that. It's a matter of clarification. Sticking with yourself, can you outline for me how you, I mean, obviously you acknowledge it as in terms of the, low end rather than substantial harm, how you came to that distinction. I mean, obviously there's been considerable commentary this evening about the massing. So how did you come to that calculation, distinguishing on the lower end rather than substantial?
Yeah, I mean, it's not an exact science. It's not, kind of but there's a matrix that you follow that leads you to that conclusion. It's more around just looking at the scale of intervention within the historic fabric, looking at what the detail of any extensions or interventions needed to change the use of the scheme, and then coming to a kind of total view on that scale of harm relative to what impact those interventions would have overall. So it isn't, I say, just a kind of a tick box. It is something where there's quite a logical order that we've got to follow in terms of how we assess that harm overall. Having said that, again, the applicant's team as well, in terms of their heritage assessment, lays out how they've considered that. And again, as officers, we would undertake, as we've done in our report, our own independent assessment of that against the degree of harm that is encountered. I mean, the test in terms of the scale of harm is covered obviously by case law and by a lot of appeal decisions that come forward. Really for something to go to the upper end of substantial harm or to, of less than substantial harm or to substantial harm, you're looking really at kind of, the whole entity of a building being demolished in its entirety, or there being changes made that can't be internally retrofitted or removed from the fabric. So this is why, again, with this scheme, we have tried to calibrate that quite carefully, particularly given the fact the building is in vacant consideration, is in deteriorating state, albeit it's, it's a slow deterioration. But I think that's where we've come to the rounded balance in terms of where the degree of harm falls, really.
And then I suppose sticking with yourself, obviously you mentioned Block A to serve a community use. Obviously this will continue to remain private property, but what kind of concessions can be made to ensure that this still retains a community function?
Yeah, so we have had quite a lot of discussions with colleagues in economic development, including site visits with them to explore the uses that could be that could feasibly operate from the building, because as you've alluded to, there are obviously restrictions there because of the heritage nature of the site, and that does mean that the potential community uses are limited. In terms of there's, obviously the floor plan is, the committee rooms upstairs are quite challenging in terms of finding an operator that could use them. So there are challenges there. That is why we have left the heads of terms quite open-ended, because we want to make sure we're not being overly restrictive in terms of future uses and occupiers, to allow for us to take the time that the developer needs or economic development team need to work to identify a suitable user, really. So hopefully that's what we've achieved through keeping quite an open-ended heads of terms here, and just ensuring that ultimately, though, what we do get is something that will be affordable for a community group to operate from.
Thank you. If I may continue? Yeah. So I want to continue on the notion of affordable, touching on the matter of the affordable provisions. As you mentioned in your report, you did instruct a independent assessor for this. As I understand, this is not typical for an application for you to kind of go external. Can you reference what proportion of affordability the independent review came back with versus as I believe there's a 15% on site that's being proposed?
Yep. So first, to clarify, where we have an affordable offer which isn't fully compliant with the development plan policies, we do normally instruct an external consultant to review that on our behalf, because obviously it requires a quite specialist area of knowledge and expertise, and that ensures that we as the council are getting the best value out of these schemes and the best affordable offer that we can. So we use BPS, we're our independent consultants, and we have used them on a number of other schemes, and they have always been very, very helpful to us in getting a better offer. So to answer your question, the initial offer put to us by the developer was 15% on-site affordable housing, all shared ownership, which is not as affordable, obviously, as a social rent or a London living rent, which is a rented tenure, so far more accessible to a wider breadth of population. And there was also no offer for a payment in lieu. So we went through really quite a long negotiation and interrogation with our advisors to make sure that what we were securing truly was the maximum that this scheme could achieve. This involves sensitivity testing to establish, if we did this, what would the outcome be? Could we get anything better? The outcome, the final outcome of our viability review actually demonstrates that the offer that is being made to us would exceed the maximum viable contribution. So it goes above and beyond in terms of the payment in lieu of what we would consider to be the maximum viable contribution here. So the developer has made a commercial decision to make an enhanced offer to enhance the public benefits flowing from the scheme here. So we, like I said, we did really interrogate the viability. We are very confident in the outcome that we've had from our viability assessors, and we have also secured 2 review mechanisms, with the late stage one in particular at 75% of sales for the market units. That will ensure that we can capture the actual achieved sales values, if there was an increase in that beyond the projected GDV, the gross development value. If construction costs happen to decline, if the off-plan sales were better than anticipated, we would be able to capture an enhanced payment in lieu to go towards affordable housing through that. And again, we would be using external independent advisors to make sure that we are getting the level of expertise we need to interrogate their review and make sure we are, again, getting the best possible outcome for residents in terms of affordable housing.
Thank you. Just to follow up on this, I understand you've made it clear how that it was not viable to go further. I'm just not entirely clear on why, and I do not know if the independent assessor exactly explained. I mean, you mentioned, and Mr. Brisbane also mentioned heritage, for example, but I just thought you would expand, if not necessarily for this item, just so we know for future reference as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the MPPF requires that we can only secure financial contributions up until the point at which the scheme would become unviable. So we can't, through planning, require submission of obligations that would go beyond what the scheme could reasonably be expected to achieve. So in terms of the inputs, we have established a level of the anticipated sales values using evidence, and then we go through the process. We look at the costs, which were subject to extensive review as well, given the heritage status of the building. There was two cost consultants reviewing the scheme, a heritage specialist and a general QS, who were able to review the scheme. And ultimately, what our advisor found was that when we applied the inputs that we considered reasonable, there were no outcomes that could allow us to achieve an enhanced offer. So as I sort of alluded to in terms of, is there an option for the buildings to go higher? It's not simply that they're heritage buildings and we need to protect their significance. If a building starts increasing in height, there's additional requirements, such as under the Fire Safety Act, to provide additional staircases. And that then erodes the viability of the scheme further. It's not as simple, unfortunately, as sort of put a few extra stories on top, enhance the viability, get more affordable housing.
Okay, so crudely, it became a question of protecting the heritage versus more affordable housing, as well as what you said about, going higher with all the complications that this would come with. Is that fair?
I think I would put more emphasis on, it isn't as simple as just increasing the massing of the building, because of the additional costs, the construction costs that come with increasing the height there. Whilst, yes, of course, protecting the heritage significance of the Grade 2 star listed buildings is very important, even if we had allowed additional height, that does not necessarily mean that they would have been able to secure more affordable housing. Once you go over a certain threshold, the Building Safety Act kicks in and there's additional fire safety considerations.
Thank you, Chair. Just to simplify it, and going to Sinead's point, we do, on the big schemes involving housing, that's irrespective of where it is, as long as it's below our policy requirement, we have to carefully look at any viabilities, or we do instruct consultants. The issue here, I think it's been hinted at, but to put it bluntly, the moving parts of this scheme are significant. There's a significant heritage benefit and heritage asset, and therefore a heritage cost that needs to get fed into any viability, in addition to our policy requirements of maximising the affordable housing. So here, going to Sinead, why we appointed 2 consultants effectively. One was to look into the specialist heritage side, and the other was to pull together the bits and provide the overall view. So It was a very complicated thing when you're having to balance one element against the other. In the first instance, going to what Alan was saying before, we had to be sure that the money that was identified in the FVA would be sufficient to do what they were proposing to do to the heritage assets, and therefore sufficient to give us comfort that we would get what we wanted out of that as a baseline starting point. Clearly, that took a significant chunk out of the pot, and I'll be honest, you know, the 15% affordable housing offer in normal circumstances, that is not going to be acceptable, which is more reason why it took so long to go backwards and forwards and try and balance these. So we did arrive at a scenario where we were comfortable that we'd got enough money to do what needed to be done to the heritage assets, and we had got a 10-year compliant affordable housing offer. As Sinead said, when it first came in, it was all intermediate. However, it was still 15%, and that's where the additional negotiation came in, if you like, to try and improve that through the payment in lieu, which can be used clearly to provide new affordable units, or could be used to further make existing units that we're providing ourselves more affordable. It gives options, but nevertheless, it's right that it should be badged up as part of the affordable housing discussion. So that's how we ended up where we are, because it wasn't as straightforward, is this enough affordable housing? There's a viability to demonstrate that. There were much more complex matters in there that equally needed to be resolved, like the heritage.
Thank you for clarifying, and thank you as well for the response. Sorry, Councillor Walsh, I interrupted you essentially.
No, it's, thank you, Chair. Continuing on the matter of affordability, obviously you did mention the late stage review. In a scenario where the sales do perform better than originally expected, you mentioned an uplift. Would that be an on-site uplift or a further increase to payment in lieu?
So on this scheme, and in most schemes where it's a late stage review mechanism at 75% of sales, it is generally a payment in lieu towards off-site affordable housing. And that is simply because of the reality and the feasibility of flipping units from market to affordable, and as well, registered providers, housing associations generally do not want to take on sort of pepper potted units throughout a market floor plate. It becomes very difficult for them in terms of managing maintenance and servicing. So on this scheme, what we have within Block E is 21 units that allows for a self-contained block of affordable housing, which will make it far more palatable to registered providers and makes it far more unlikely that it will get picked up by them, and that we will have that on-site affordable housing delivered.
You mentioned Block E there. Is this going to be the location for 100% of the affordable homes?
Yes, all affordable housing will be within Block E of the development.
And in terms of the materials, finishings, accessing to the wider campus, will this be the same as what is provided to Blocks B, C, D, and F?
So policy stipulates that affordable housing should be indistinguishable from market housing. Ultimately, in terms of final finishes, it is often that the registered provider will stipulate what they would want to see in terms of the final finishes internally. Obviously, from what we presented already, it is a very high quality development. It must be in order to protect the heritage significance of the buildings. As I mentioned in the presentation, access to the play space, on-site play space, that must be accessible to all residents, regardless of the tenure of the home that they happen to live in. So all residents will have access to the on-site play space, and they will have access to the communal gardens that are open and enhance the permeability of the sites.
Thank you. I want to continue on the matter of Block E and F. As I understand it, is it Block F is to become the care home? In terms of the servicing for Block F, obviously you mentioned it in your presentation, the final use has yet to be determined, but assuming that it will form some sort of a care function in much the same way that we see the common use for the Chiswick Nursing Centre and the other care homes in the immediate vicinity, and there are quite a few, there is quite a bit of visitor traffic. I wanted to ask about that because, as you mentioned, there'd be a study in terms of parking, and also that there would be no kind of immediate on-site parking. So where is it envisaged that visitors to this care home would park?
So to clarify, visitors to the new care home, there are 4 visitor parking bays proposed on Ravenscourt Square that would be accessible for visitors. And that's in addition to the ambulance bay and the servicing bay. So obviously visitors would also, if they chose not to travel by public transport, bearing in mind that this is a site that is within easy distance of 2 underground stations and a number of bus routes. So obviously the preference is always that people would be encouraged to travel by public transport or other sustainable means, such as cycling or walking. We are mindful that, particularly on Ravenscourt Park, there is a substantial amount of on-street pay and display parking, which could be utilised if those 4 bays were not available to residents. However, I would say, we do have the estimated trip generation, and we are confident that there is sufficient capacity for visitors attending the site under the various modes of transport.
I would query you just slightly on that matter. Given the nature of care homes, typically these are places that people are moving to from other areas, and care homes are typically not located in the immediate vicinity of where a person lives. So travel does often become necessary. And I appreciate your point about the use of public transport and active travel to visit those hypothetical future residents. In terms of the use of Ravenscourt Park as a parking facility, it would not be immediately obvious to those who are unfamiliar with the area about how one would travel from Ravenscourt Park to Block F. Obviously, for local residents, they'd be familiar with the walkway through the park. But in general, if you were looking at something like Google Maps or so, I can imagine that the most likely and obvious direction would be through Ravenscourt Square, which is an area of very limited on-street parking.
I mean, I would agree that, that there, of course, we are somewhat limited in what we can do. There is obviously the 278 works, which will create the area of public realm between the park and the site. And we are hopeful that this will help sort of demarcate and announce the sort of the cut through of the site and the permeability of the site. We are also hopeful that by providing additional care beds within the borough, that we will be able to house more of our own residents who live within the borough, because we are aware that there is a shortfall of care beds at the moment. So we are hopeful that by introducing additional care beds, we will be able to keep more of our own residents within the borough, although through sort of private care arrangements. In terms of other measures, I mean, there is a travel plan that will be secured, and as part of the travel plan, it does cover, or travel plans do cover, visitors attending the site, as well as staff and residents of the site. So we can ensure through, be it through an informative or other such mechanism, if you wish to proceed with that there would be details in terms of signposting visitors to use the on-street parking and to be able to announce the permeability of the site.
I imagine that would be quite important. Ravenscourt Square typically sits within Zone M for parking. However, it is also immediate to Goldhawk Road, which is obviously no parking. And in terms of where there is availability to actually park in the square, only a limited number of homes actually enjoy off-street parking access. And obviously the remaining on-street parking is quite limited. So in the event that the square becomes filled either by staff, visitors, or even during the construction period by those working on the site, the options for residents of the square would be, as I understand it, to either park on Ravenscourt Gardens or on Ravenscourt Park, neither of which are terribly close to their own homes. So that'd be quite a distance. So in terms of the impact there, I think there's immediate concern as well about how that would affect.
Yeah, and again, I think officers shared your concerns and have attempted to deal with this by way of planning condition and obligation. So the first thing I would say is in terms of construction, obviously, as we've said already, there will be Ravenscourt Park is to be used as the primary construction access, with Ravenscourt Square as the exception if there was a physical boundary or something that means that physically they cannot do that part of the demolition or the construction from Ravenscourt Park, then Ravenscourt Square can be used. As set out in the outline, DLP, CLP, all vehicles associated with the construction and the demolition will be within the existing hoarding on the site. So the unloading bay, the waiting bays, it's within the existing hoarding, so that there should not be queuing of construction vehicles on Ravenscourt Square in the event that Ravenscourt Square is used by construction vehicles. Furthermore, the proposals include a proposal for 24-hour concierge and management of Ravenscourt Square, because obviously one of the big issues with Ravenscourt Square at the moment is that it is used as a rat run, as a cut through between the roads, and that is, to be reduced to ensure that there is no disruption to, for example, ambulances arriving at the site. So that we are confident that there are various sort of measures, mitigations, conditions that will prevent there being an overspill of parking. And furthermore, with the CPZ review, we would hope that there would not be any excess parking from residents if the CPZ hours were to be extended accordingly as a result of the review. They won't be eligible for parking permits. Staff won't be eligible for parking permits either on the local roads. So there are sort of a number of measures that would prevent a scenario where residents are unable to park on the public highway areas of Ravenscourt Square, because just to be clear, they do not have rights at the moment to park on the private road, which the private part of Ravenscourt Square.
Thank you for that. I sort of flip your attention to the opposite side of the hospital. To the left of Block A, there is a number of apartments, and the access and egress of those apartments and their parking is shared with Block A. As I understand it, and as you can see from the road, there is actually a plan in and out, which has been suspended for quite some time. As you mentioned, the hoarding that's currently erected around the site. In terms of ensuring access to the parking bays that belong to those residents, how can that be guaranteed?
So in terms of ensuring access to the residents' off-street car park at the west side building, my understanding is that there is a separate legal agreement, separate from planning, that's a civil matter between the landowners that would ensure access for residents to the car park. As shown on the proposed plans as well, there is an access into the West Side Apartments car park through Block 8. So that has been designed in. The car parking has been designed not to interfere with that access in terms of the blue badge parking that is to be provided adjacent to Block A. But in terms of what planning controls do we have, I would advise it is instead sort of a civil legal issue between the relevant landowners, freeholders and leaseholders.
There is 2 points I'd like to make there. Firstly is the ensuring that will the previous access to both entrances be restored to those residents following the completion of works. And also, I do note, again, speaking as ward councillor, that while this building has been vacant, it has been hired out to film locations, which has resulted in the placement of trailers, which has caused some blockages on occasions or disturbances. In terms of ensuring that all of the construction work would actually be contained within the current hoardings and not spill out, as seems to have been the unfortunate case during the filming, is this something that can be guaranteed as condition?
So in terms of maintaining the access to the car park for the West Side block, I would again say that is a legal matter between the various landowners and not necessarily something that we have control of through planning. If there is an easement over the land, that is, that is a separate legal matter. In terms of ensuring that all construction activity is contained within the hoardings, that is what is proposed to us at the moment in the outline construction logistics plan, and that is what we would be looking to see in the final iteration of that we will be securing by condition as well. It is shown as that all construction vehicles would be held within the hoarding lines, and obviously we understand that that is of particular importance given the need for 24-hour ambulance access to the nursing centre.
Thank you. I want to draw your attention to page 135, where you do discuss, obviously, your current construction logistics plan, which is stated as this proposal is not fully supported by officers. Could you elaborate as to your reasoning and to any alternative proposals that you would currently be proposing, given the not fully support?
Yes, absolutely. So again, I would echo the residents and your concerns about the use of Ravenscourt Square, and that is what officers are uncomfortable with. At present, even though there is the commitment to use Ravenscourt Park rather than Ravenscourt Square as the primary access, we feel that it needs to be demonstrated to us that Ravenscourt Park will be used as far as possible, and we want to see a further reduction in vehicular movements on Ravenscourt Square, because we would have significant concerns about ongoing emergency access through that road, as well as impacts upon residents that would occur from using what is, a very constrained road. Realistically, we are aware of the issues with Ravenscourt Garden in terms of congestion, fully aware of those issues, fully appreciate them, and fully support residents with their concerns and their assertions that Ravenscourt Square is not the best road to accommodate construction and demolition vehicles, and Ravenscourt Park is far better suited for that purpose.
Thank you. I'm going to propose that the matter of the construction and logistics plan and the DLP be referred back to committee. given obviously that there is substantial questions about this and that these are not resolved matters, typically, as I understand, these would be devolved to yourselves to discuss and to agree. But Chair, I am proposing that this not be given to delegated authority and be referred back to committee once an agreement has been reached.
Thank you. Can I just check with legal if that's something?
Yes. So I think Councillor Walsh is proposing that as a motion. If it's seconded, you can vote on it, and that's all that will be needed. So when we come to the recommendation 1, what it would mean is that if planning permission is to be granted and authority delegated to officers in respect of the conditions, in respect of this particular condition, it'll be brought back to committee.
Is that what you're suggesting, Councillor Walsh, that the construction logistics plans, the demolition logistics plans come back to committee when for further discussion at a future stage? Is that right?
Yes, Chair, I am proposing that as a condition.
As you're saying that is there some difference in the condition in the motion?
Yeah. Sorry. So it wouldn't be appropriate to add it as a condition.
Sorry, as a motion.
Yes,
apologies for my choice of grammar. I propose that as a motion, and I seek a seconder.
Thank you. I'm happy to second that myself. So this is something that we'll take at the...
We can take it when you're taking the final vote on recommendation 1.
Okay. Thank you very much for proposing this. I'm happy to second, so we can take this at the end. I think you make a good point. There are still outstanding concerns, and we have seen both today and from the presentations that this is an issue. Of course, I understand the applicant will engage with residents, but I think it is something that if it comes back to committee, we can scrutinize further, which I understand is your goal, and I think that's fair.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that committee has granted me considerable time, so I'm going to end my questions for now.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all your questions. Do we have further questions? Councillor Pascoe-Tilbury.
Thank you very much. Just a couple from me. The first is my understanding right that to give a 2-star listing to a 20th century building is pretty exceptional, and it's a kind of listing that you only give to very few, which are of really significant merit?
Yes, Councillor, that's correct. I mean, this is quite a unique building in terms of its original form, function, and the architectural styles we mentioned. So it is one that that has been subject to that listing and that upgrade of listing earlier on in the process. But yeah, grade 2-star listing is obviously something that goes into the upper echelons, really.
So the fact that Historic England is happy with the proposals is something that we should give quite a bit of weight to.
Yeah, I mean, again, as we've mentioned, the revisions to the scheme throughout the application process, the additional detail, particularly in terms of the method statements around the restoration of the building, and given the fact that the building is currently on the at-risk register, the proposals have been scrutinised extensively by Historic England, and again, their final commentary and authorisation to proceed for the council to make a decision, is quite a positive step in that regard, really.
Thanks very much. On a slightly different issue, these are very clearly going to be expensive flats and pretty high-end flats. Given that, and also given the demographics of the care home, which is something the Councillor Walsh pointed out, to what extent are we sure that we've done our best in really judging the use of traffic? I say that because people who have money to spend on luxury flats often have cars, often will use taxis more than public transport and so on. So I wonder if there's any additional weighting we've done to traffic usage in terms of that, as well as the care home use.
In terms of weighting trip generation, in terms of demographics and the value, the projected value of dwellings, that isn't something that typically would form part of the assessment in terms of estimating the trip generation. Yes, we understand that people may own cars, but this wouldn't be a suitable development for them, likely because they won't be eligible for parking permits on local roads, and there won't be any provision for general needs parking on the site for residents. In terms of vehicular movements, in terms of taxis, again, it's something that it's incredibly difficult for us to control through planning. However, what we have done is said that all taxi drop-offs, pickups, delivery, servicing, it will go via Ravenscourt Park, and through the historic entrance into the hospital. It won't go on to, we'll be avoiding Ravenscourt Square. There will be, it will be clear for residents that they are to use that entrance there, and that is, in the view of officers, sufficient to minimise impacts on the local highway network.
Thanks very much. And is it possible that the car-free nature of this development will have impacted its commerciality, because there will be a group of people to whom these flats are no longer attractive?
Through the chair, yes is the short answer. I mean, I think it's an established approach now, if you're looking at traffic reduction, to make developments, new developments of size anyway, permit-free. It's widely acknowledged that if you provide parking spaces, people will drive and be encouraged to drive. Even commercial buildings, the approach of the council for some time has been that we will allow operational requirements to be met on site usually, but we won't provide commuter parking or parking that doesn't need to be there. And this is the issue we had with the previous iteration of the scheme, where they had residential parking for these flats. Yes, I can imagine that they're much more worthwhile, with them. But the downside is that would be encouraging traffic that we knew would be coming in, because why wouldn't you if you've got a car parking space? And there would be problems associated with that outweighed any benefit, if you like. And that was the discussion we had to have with the developer. It's a difficult kind of conversation, because it seems to be counterintuitive if you to stop giving people parking spaces, but that's the only way really, and it's pan-London, not just here, to discourage people from driving to an area, whether they be residents or whether they be living there. The second arm of that, if you like, is the controlled parking zone, because obviously that doesn't work unless you've got a controlled parking zone as well, where it's you buy a ticket, you can park, you can't buy a ticket, you can't park, and that's where the permit-free approach comes in, to try and make sure that in discouraging people to drive there, you're also stopping people competing for the limited on-site parking with the locals who have got tickets. So that they work together, those two things, but they are tried and untested, and it's right across London, as I say.
Thank you very much. Just one final one from me is obviously the gentleman Stephen, I think, spoke eloquently about the impact on numbers 9 to 17. I just wanted your comments on the points that he made, because I think it's very important that they be dealt with.
Yeah, absolutely agree. That it is important that they are addressed. So in terms of the impacts on daylight sunlight and the use of the BRE guidance and the BRE criteria for assessing existing buildings, the BRE guidance is a guide for site planning and layouts for new developments. And within that, it assesses, it provides a guideline for these are the target levels of daylight sunlight that should be afforded to existing dwellings. If you have X number of annual probable sunlight hours, this is a well-lit existing dwelling. And then it assesses, this level of loss would be materially harmful. It would be noticeable to residents is one of the key factors. So whilst the numbers, particularly where you're looking at the winter probable sunlight hours, which is between the equinoxes, proportionately, because obviously sunlight hours are going to be reduced during those months, that the reduction can look larger just simply because of the proportionality of the relatively low numbers. What I will say is, looking at Ravenscourt Square, so number 15, there's actually the kitchen diner to the lower ground floor actually sees an increase in daylight sunlight as a result of the pulling back of the massing. The other dwellings there, they all achieve vastly beyond in general, what the BRE guidance would say is a good level of sunlighting. And this is a good level of sunlighting, regardless of it being in an urban environment. It is just generally a very good level of sunlight, a very good level of daylight. And these dwellings continue to benefit from that. Yes, there would be some reductions. However, the reductions are fully within the tolerances of the BRE guidelines, which allow officers to conclude that there would be no material harm to the enjoyment of the dwelling house as a result of the development coming forward. The losses are well within the tolerances that we would see. They are very much at the absolute lowest end. And yeah, we are comfortable that there would be no material harm to residents' amenity.
Thank you. Just on that, Mr. Walker also raised the issue that blocks E, F do not comply with conservation area standards, and I just wondered if you could respond to that point, perhaps you, Alan.
Thank you, Chair. So I think just to reaffirm, the approach that we've taken is in line with the MPPF. So the MPPF, as is mentioned in paragraphs 11.36 and 11.37 of the report, covers off that if we consider there is any harm to heritage assets, either that be in harm to the asset itself, either a conservation area or a listed building, or to other assets in terms of their setting, the correct approach to take is to attribute the amount of harm to that asset in the first instance, and then look at what heritage or other public benefits are deemed to outweigh that harm. That's the approach that the MPPF takes. I think the discussion, obviously, around there being harm to the asset, we have concluded there is some harm resulting to the setting of the group of locally listed buildings and the grade 2 listed building. And again, the weighting and the way that we've reported that in the report covers off the fact that we feel that the heritage benefits of bringing the grade 2 star listed building back into a viable use, alongside the other public benefits and heritage benefits, do outweigh that harm overall in terms of considering the whole balance. And again, the statutory duties placed upon the local authority under section 72 and 66 of the Planning Listed Building Act. So I think we obviously have covered that off sequentially, but how we assess that, and I think it's important for members to note that that is the process that is a requirement of the MPPF.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions? Just very quickly, one from me. A few residents, both in the late submissions and previous ones, mentioned boiler house as something we should take into account. If you could just talk to us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Boiler House is a vacant site. It's adjacent to the Chiswick Nursing Centre and is accessed from Ravenscourt Square. We understand that Okay, I'll just briefly share my screen to provide some more context on the location of it. So to speak to it briefly whilst I bring it up, it is under the ownership of the applicant. And however, we have not seen any proposals. No proposals have been made to the council. I know there are references within some of the representations regarding a potential 60-unit building. I would emphasise that has not been presented to the council in any way. We understand that was marketing material that was prepared by a commercial real estate agent who typically they will provide sort of an indicative what they think the site could achieve for the purposes of marketing. It is not part of this application site. If an application was to come forward on that site in the future, of course, we would be considering any cumulative impacts with the scheme that we have in front of us today.
And therefore, we in our decision making should not consider anything because it's not part of the application whatsoever.
That is right. It falls outside the red line boundary of the application site.
Yeah, thank you. Ewan?
Sorry, Chair, thank you. Just to say we were aware of that. It was part of the estate, obviously, of the hospital, and we were discussing it at pre-application level with the owner. It was made clear they didn't own it, they were interested in it, but this application came through without it simply because it wasn't within their power to do it. And what you say is absolutely correct. I mean, it has no weight in the dissemination of this application, but the important point, I think, is if somebody were to acquire that or to come forward and wish to see that developed, particularly in a manner that's been outlined, it seems, in this correspondence, we would expect them to go through a proper pre-application process with us. And part of that, as you know, it involves reaching out to local residents and stakeholders and letting them know the way things are developing before they put the application in. So certainly if it's of a scale that's been indicated there, that it wouldn't be the sort of thing that we'd encourage to be submitted without pre-application advice and without that community engagement.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. No further questions? No further questions. In that case, we move on to voting. Firstly, on whether recommendation 1, as in the report, is agreed. We've also had, do we take it separately, the motion, or is it part of the motion? Is that?
You can reach out as part of recommendation 1.
Yeah, so as part of recommendation 1, we've also had the motion submitted by Councillor Walsh to have the construction logistics plan and the demolition logistics plan come to committee for further consideration when those are submitted. Councillor Melton, will you be voting for, against, or abstaining?
For the motion.
Recommendation 1 and the motion taken as one.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Walsh?
For.
Councillor Pascoe-Tilbury?
For.
And I will also be voting for. We move on to recommendation 2 in the report. Councillor Melton?
For.
Councillor Walsh?
For.
Councillor Pascoe-Tilbury? And I will also be voting for. And finally, recommendation 3, Councillor Melton?
For.
Councillor Walsh?
For.
Councillor Pascoe-Tilbury?
For.
And I will also be voting for. Now, that was item number 5. We also have to separately vote for item number 6. Moving on to voting on whether recommendation 1 of the report is agreed. Councillor Melton?
For.
Councillor Walsh?
For.
Councillor Pascoe-Tilbury?
For.
And I'm also voting for. On whether recommendation 2 of the report is agreed. Councillor Melton?
For.
Councillor Walsh?
For.
Councillor Pascoe-Tilbury?
For.
And I will also be voting for. And that means both items are agreed. Thank you very much. And many thanks to officers and to members of the public. We will now move on to what was item number 4, which is a former laundry site at rear of numbers 9 to 61 Pennard Road and W12. There'll just be a couple of minutes while we change, and then John Sanchez will present. John, if you're ready, we can begin.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm going to run through a presentation for this application. The application seeks permission for the retention of existing shipping containers on the site for a temporary period for use as creative and affordable workspace units and ancillary storage. During the presentation, I'll summarise the proposals, plus I'll also summarise the comments that have been received in respect to this application. Before I start, I'd like to draw members' attention to the addendum. Specifically, I wish to refer to the additional representations that were received, which were missing from the printed report, and to paragraph 4.2 of the committee report. For the record, and at the point of time when the report was published, the local planning authority received 139 objections in total, including representations from the former chair of the Shepherd's Bush Market Traders Association, Friends of Shepherd's Bush Market, and residents in the vicinity of the site, including Pennards Road and Lime Grove. I wish to draw the committee's attention to the fact that for the most part, the objections received came in the form of a standardised letter. The objections are summarised in paragraph 4.3 of the committee report. The additional 23 representations that are listed on the addendum do not draw out any new points for consideration and affect the determination of this application. I'd also like to draw the members' attention to 2 reps that were received in support of the application, plus a further representation from the chair of the Shepherd's Bush Market Traders Association supporting the proposals. In summary, the representation from the Traders Association outlines the benefits to the market users in terms of providing affordable storage space, assisting traders to buy and store goods in greater quantity, and providing facilities for local charities. The association also states the proposal has had a negligible impact on the traders and the running of the market itself. This next image shows an aerial view of the site and the layout of the containers back in April 2020. The application, as stated before, is for the continued use and retention of the existing containers that remain on the site for a further temporary period. This is the 4th temporary use application that the local planning authority have received and considered in association with the use of the shipping containers. The first application being approved back in November 2017. The last permission was granted on the 24th of March 2023 and expired on the 31st of December 2024. An application was submitted by the applicant for the continued use of the site and shipping containers on the 12th of December, prior to the expiration of the last permission. For this reason, officers did not consider expedient to take enforcement action whilst this application is under consideration. This application was replaced by a new application, now the subject of this committee report, which updates the status and number of containers on the site. It should be noted by members that the current proposal is very different to the ones previously dealt with in the earlier permissions. During the last 8 years, the temporary uses on the site have been badly affected by the pandemic, and as a result, the use of the site has become a lot less intensive in the last few years. Currently, there are 52 containers on the site compared to the original 71, which are shown in this image. 18 units have been removed in recent years, and this has included some of the containers along the rear boundary of properties fronting Pennard Road. The use of the containers themselves has also varied. Originally, the meanwhile use was designed to comprise a mix of uses, including affordable workspace, leisure, cultural, and food and beverage uses, including outdoor seating areas. All the leisure and food and beverage uses have ceased to operate on the site. The applicant has advised officers that 15 of the current 52 units are occupied and in use. This equates to just under 30%. Some of the units are let to market traders, whilst 3 are let to charities and 3 to the Bush Theatre. This slide shows the application site, which is in yellow, in context with the wider Shepherd's Bush redevelopment scheme, which was granted permission on the 7th of August last year. This slide shows the red line boundary of the application site. The site covers an area of 0.42 hectares. It's bounded to the east by the properties in Pennard Road, to the west by the Shepherd's Bush Market, and to the south by both commercial and residential properties on Goldhawk Road. The site is located in Shepherd's Bush Town Centre and is located within part of the White City regeneration area. It's also within a designated strategic site which encompasses the market and adjoining lands. This slide shows the current layout of the containers. As stated, there are currently 52 units on the site. The yellow containers, 35 in total, are designated for creative and affordable workspace uses. The blue are defined as storage units, mainly used by market traders, along with cycle storage and toilet facilities. The next 3 slides show photos of the current condition of the site, which were taken in February and July 2025. In total, the containers cover an area just under 1,000 square meters. Units are currently placed in a single configuration, either in a linear form around the edges of the site or in small clusters. The containers themselves sit on a hard surface comprising of asphalt or tarmac finish. There is very little existing vegetation or soil remaining on site. Minimal external lighting currently exists. Containers themselves are designed in the form of either glazed or roller shutter enclosures. The primary access arrangements remain the same as the previous applications and are controlled by the site's management team. The main access arrangements are via Market Lane off Goldhawk Road, adjacent to the Kindrick Studio building, with secondary access arrangements via the market itself. The Pennard Road entrance is a controlled access, primarily for emergency purposes, and again is controlled by site security, who are also responsible for the management of the market. In discussion with the applicant, the proposed hours of operation have been revised. It is now proposed that the site would operate between 0800 hours and 2000 hours, Monday to Sunday, including bank holidays. The site currently operates to reflect the opening times of the market, which operate between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. on Monday to Saturdays and closed on Sundays. Whilst the applicant has reduced the operating times to reflect the current uses on the site, they have also requested some flexibility, particularly with regard to Sunday use, despite this being used infrequently and managed by the security team. As pointed earlier, we have received a total of 139 objection letters, and most of these have come in a standard form. So I'd like to just summarise briefly some of the key points that have been raised. So objections have been made about the operating times and opening hours being inconsistent with the market use. In response, officers wish to state that the site is an independent operation to the market, yet managed by on-site site security. The applicant has reduced the hours, which now generally align with the market, but as pointed before, need some flexibility on Sundays. This will be controlled by the operational management plan and the on-site management team. Officers do not consider that proposed hours set out in condition 3 of the recommendation will lead to an adverse impact on the amenity of surrounding occupiers. Objections have also been made about noise. It should be pointed out that the site is now a much less intensive use, and the proposals will not give rise to noise-intensive activities compared to some of the previous temporary permissions, which included the food and beverage uses. For this reason, during the assessment of the application, officers did not feel it necessary for an updated noise assessment to be carried out. Comments have also been made around accessibility, emergency exits. Again, it should be pointed out that there are numerous access points to the site, with Pennard Road only being used for emergency purposes. Comments have also been made about the mismanagement of the site finances and service charge accountability. Again, this is an independent operation to Shepherd's Bush Market, and for this reason, the applicant has advised the local planning authority that no costs associated with the use are passed on to the tenants of the market itself. Comments have also been made about land contamination, risk of health, hazardous materials, and ecological and flood risk issues. It should be pointed out that the application does not break ground. The site is currently almost extensively covered by hard surfaces, and for this reason do not give rise to contamination risks. It should also be noted that following the first permission in 2017, the council discharged numerous conditions related to contamination. At this time, it was the view of the council that no remediation was required. For this reason, officers did not consider it necessary for the applicant to resubmit the studies, as the circumstances had not changed. There's also been comments raised about the uncertainty regarding Imperial College partnership. Again, officers feel this is irrelevant to the determination of this application. The applicant has, however, advised officers that Imperial status on the project has not changed. Comments have also been made regarding impact on residential amenity, concerning overshadowing and the wider impacts. Officers are of the view that this is a low key and single-story height development, and for these reasons, the development does not pose any adverse effects in terms of loss of outlook or light. Comments have also been made about parking pressures on Pennard Road. As stated, this is a very low intensive use at present. Notwithstanding this, the site benefits from excellent public transport accessibility and the provision of on-site cycle parking. It is therefore not perceived that the development will have an adverse effect on parking. Comments have also been made around the erosion of ethnic and cultural diversity in the market and repeated mismanagement of the laundry site. Again, the site is used by market traders and charities. This is only for a meanwhile temporary use. And for this reason, again, consider these points irrelevant to the consideration of this application. So on this basis, officers are recommending that planning permission be granted for a further temporary period of 1 year, plus allowing a further 3 months for the removal of the containers from the site. So it's 15 months in total. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. That's very comprehensive. We also have a couple of speakers. We have Louise Page-Jennings on behalf of the applicant and Peter Wheeler, who is chairman of the Shepherd's Bush Market and Tent Association. And you have 5 minutes between you. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, councillors. My name's Peter James Wheeler, and I've been associated with the Shepherd's Bush Market Tenants Association for over 45 years, and I've been chairman for the past 5 years. And I'm speaking to you on behalf of the Shepherd's Bush Market Traders Association this evening in support of the planning application number 2025/01351/4, which seeks to renew the permission to continued use of the old laundry yard by U Capital. This space has been the central part of the market's operational infrastructure since its initial approval in 2020. The permission has been renewed multiple times since and during this period, and it has provided critical logistical and storage solutions for several market traders. Many of our members use this facility to receive bulk deliveries and store stock, enabling them to remain competitive amidst this difficult trading environment. This site is not only functional but vital to the economic viability of small businesses operating within the market. We are aware that there have been a minimal, if any, disruption to the wider market caused by continued use of this space. In fact, its availability has strengthened the market's operational capacity and flexibility. Furthermore, the old laundry yard is used by reputable community organisations, including the Shepherd's Bush Theatre, which leases 3 containers, and Flow Happy, a charitable organisation providing free sanitary products in public spaces. Given the lack of affordable commercial storage in Shepherd's Bush, the removal of this facility would have a significant negative impact on both traders and local community stakeholders. We are concerned that recent objections may be motivated less by legitimate planning considerations and more by the intent to delay the long-anticipated redevelopment of Shepherd's Bush Market. This market has experienced in years of underdevelopment and gradual decline, and our members frequently express frustration at delays and are eager to see progress. The renewal of this application is a necessary step towards the goal. We respectfully urge the Council to consider the wide economic benefits of this facility and approve the renewal without delay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, members of the committee. My name's Louise, and I'm here tonight representing U Capital. This application, the application that you're reviewing, is for the continued use of the old laundry yard in Shepherd's Bush Market. It's not a development. Over the last 5 years since taking over the operation of the old laundry yard, we have managed it with care and consideration. At present, the site, as you've heard, is used for storage for Shepherd's Bush Market traders and for charities like the Bush Theatre and Flow Happy. It has some limited workspace too. We have carefully considered the pro forma objection that has been submitted to the council, and we have robustly responded to each point. Just to clarify on some of the things that have already been covered, while traders are able to rent space for storage, the old laundry yard is managed and operated entirely independently of the market next door. There haven't been any noise complaints in the last 5 years of our operation. Emergency access to the old laundry yard is via Pennard Road, not the market. There is no contamination risk from the proposed continuation of use. The site is in hard standing and we're not breaking ground. There have been no changes in the last 5 years that would significantly impact biodiversity, something else that was brought up as an objection. And flooding and drainage, again, is not something that would be affected by this application. It's just a continuation of use. And again, it's a lot of hard standing. All of the other issues raised in the objection pro forma were addressed during the master plan application and relate to that where they're relevant at all. We will continue to operate the Old Laundry Yard safely and conscientiously, and we hope that you can give this application your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. If you'd like to take your seat back at the gallery, we'll now move on to questions from members of the committee. Are there any questions? Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Chair. This is less of a set of questions, more of a comment. Given obviously that this committee has approved the master plan back last August, this does seem to be a considered extension while preparations are ongoing for the construction of the new Shepherd's Bush Market, and I intend to support this.
Thank you very much. Councillor Pascal, any questions? Sorry to put you on the spot. Very good. And I will also echo Councillor Walsh's comments. We'll now move on to voting to formalise that. Firstly, on whether recommendation 1 in the report is agreed, Councillor Melton, are you voting for, against, or not voting?
For.
Councillor Walsh?
For.
Councillor Pascal Tilbury?
For.
And I will also be voting for. And on whether recommendation 2 in the report is agreed, Councillor Melton? For. Councillor Walsh?
For.
Councillor Pascal Tilbury?
For.
And I will also be voting for. Therefore, both recommendations are approved. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone. And thank you, John. Which means we now move promptly on to item number 7, which is White City Living, and we'll have Sinead come back to the top table to present.
Thank you, Chair. So I will keep this as brief as possible. So this application, it's a full application for what is phase 5 of White City Living. It's referred to as a drop-in application throughout the committee report, as this application relates purely to phase 5 of what was the original master plan consent for White City Living, which was granted through an outline consent and varied many times since. To be clear, this application, it doesn't propose anything additional to what has been previously secured through the outline consent. It simply seeks to provide a procedural route to allow for phase 5 to come forward, as unfortunately the reserved matters submission deadline for phase 5 on the outline consent was missed. The developer did not submit the reserved matters application before the relevant date, and following legal advice, this was determined to be the appropriate route forward to allow for the master plan as a whole to come forward. So the White City Living Scheme phases 1 to 4 are in yellow, and phase 5 is highlighted there in pink. And this just shows the quantum of development that has been approved across the whole site. So phase 5 there is edged in red. It is the final phase of the development. Across the development, the whole master plan, there are 2,030 homes approved, and phase 5 provides 163 market homes over 30 stories. So I've spoken to this already, but to be clear, the proposal in front of us now, it's fully consistent with the approved outline parameters and design code. There is no deviation from that. And the deviation, the missing of the reserve matters submission deadline was owing to changes to the phasing and how the order in which the relevant buildings were to be brought forward. So just to make members aware, affordable housing across the whole of the scheme. So it's provided throughout the master plan. There were 427 affordable homes, affordable homes within phase 2 that has been completed, and there are 65 affordable homes that will be delivered in phase 4. And that will be, work has commenced on phase 4, so it will come forward before phase 5, and that is in addition to a payment in lieu towards the off-site affordable housing, which has been already paid in full by the developer. And the payment in lieu and the on-site provision, we have previously concluded that that would be equivalent to a 35% provision on site. We did test the viability again upon the submission of the full application, just to ensure that there'd been no betterment. However, the viability review was able to conclude that the scheme could not support any additional on-site affordable housing. These are some CGIs of the image. So phase 5, plot C1 is the tall, slender building there. It's a detailed design. Further details of the design. It's an indicative floor plan. The scheme is generally of a very high quality in terms of residential amenity for future occupiers. All occupiers would have private amenity space in addition to the amenity space that is provided communally. Parking, cycle storage, servicing is all provided in the master plan basement. And this shows the layout. In terms of the energy strategy, so although there is no additionality, so we couldn't secure anything beyond what we had already secured through the outline section 106, because we have adopted the local tariff for carbon offsetting, this did result in an increased liability to achieve net zero for phase 5 only. So we will be securing 849,360 to allow for net zero to be achieved. It's a summary of the planting, landscaping and play space that is to be delivered as part of phase 5. This is the final part of the garden concept across the master plan as a whole. And again, that's just a summary of the affordable housing, which I have already spoken to. And in terms of the mechanisms we'll be using a deed of variation to the legal agreement that has already been secured to the outline. This will introduce the drop-in permission, if permission is to be granted, as a definition, and it will ensure that phase 5 is tied to all obligations that have been previously secured on the outline consent. So that includes matters such as permit free and the various other payments and obligations that we secured in the outline consent. So that concludes my presentation. Officers recommend that planning permission is granted subject to conditions and a legal agreement.
Thank you very much. We have no speakers on this item, so we'll move straight on to questions from members of the committee. Do we have any questions from members of the committee? That's very good. Another very detailed presentation that covered all the bases. Thank you very much. We move on straight to voting in that case. And first, on whether recommendation 1 in the report is agreed. Councillor Melton, are you voting for, against, or not voting?
For.
Councillor Walsh?
For.
Councillor Pascal-Toulbray?
For.
And I'm also voting for. And now on whether recommendation 2 in the report is agreed. Councillor Melton?
For.
Councillor Walsh?
For.
Councillor Pascal-Toulbray?
For.
And I will also be voting for. Therefore, the item is approved. Thank you very much. We now move on to... Oh, there's a recommendation 3. Sorry, it doesn't usually happen. Councillor Melton, on whether recommendation 3 in the report is agreed.
For.
Councillor Walsh?
For.
Councillor Pascal Tilbury.
For.
And I'm also voting for. And now the application has been officially approved. Thank you very much. We move on to item number 8, which is Threshold in Union House in Shepherd's Bush Green. Neil, when you're ready, we'll have your presentation.
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to the Hoxton Hotel, which is based at Threshold House, Shepherd's Bush Green. It's an application for a variation of condition 41 of the planning permission, which concerns the hours of operation of the rear outside terrace at ground floor level. They're seeking to extend the opening hours of the external terrace until 9 o'clock Monday to Sunday, including bank holidays, for a temporary 18-month period. The original condition required them to close at 6 in the evening. Show you this is the site shown on the map, closing the red line. An aerial view of the site, although they don't appear to have taken a recent aerial view, so this would be prior to the redevelopment. And then this is the ground floor plan, and you can see the area in red is the external terrace to the hotel. The green area is a bit of planting. There is an alleyway behind outside the red line where my cursor is just now, and then you have the rear gardens of properties in Pennard Road. So this area is used by the hotel for the bar and restaurant, which is here accessed through these doors. There are also a number of function rooms that have some access out onto the site. I'll just show you some photographs of the existing terrace. You can see this is looking towards the north where it narrows and before it wraps around the building. And then this is from the southern end, again looking towards the north. You see the planting area on the left. And again, another view of that. You can see there is a reasonably high brick wall between the hotel and the alleyway behind, which is approximately 2.3 meters high. And then that's looking down towards the south. You can see seating area and the canopies. Again, that's looking towards the Pennard Road properties. So officers, when the application first came in, they were seeking to extend the hours till 11 o'clock at night, 7 days a week. We did get a number of objections from the local residents concerned about the impacts it would have on their amenity. And following discussions, then the applicants proposed a lesser closing hour of 9 o'clock for a temporary period, which would allow that to be monitored. And I mean, once that 18-month period was up, the applicants would have to revert to the original hours, or the applicants could make a further submission to make those hours more permanent, depending on how the operations have gone and whether it has generated any complaints or significant complaints. As such, officers are recommending that a temporary permission for 18 months would be granted for the development. There's a reference there to a legal agreement only because there was a legal agreement with the original permission, and as such, we need a deed of variation if this temporary permission is granted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. If you could leave the recommendations on just so we can have them when we're voting. Thank you. We also have a speaker, Mr. Robert Leonardi, to speak in support of the application. If you'd like to take the seat where the microphone is, and there'll be 3 minutes of a lot of time for you to speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Roberto. I'm the General Manager of the Hoxton Shepherd's Bush. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this evening regarding our application to extend the licence hours from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. on our outdoor patio to the rear of the restaurant. We are looking to create an outdoor seating area and continue serving what's there at the moment in a restaurant capacity, with operating hours limited to 9 p.m. This proposal reflects careful and measured effort to enhance guest experience for the hotel and for our main restaurant, and with respect to our residential neighbours and surrounding environment. A couple of the hurdles that we've experienced and objectives we've got mainly around noise that I'd like to address. We are not proposing a bar or late night venue. I want to be clear that this is a restaurant-led operation. The patio extension from 6 p.m. and it currently only serves food out there, will just extend by 3 hours. This will be used exclusively for seated dining. There will be no amplified music or entertainment, and service will conclude at 9 p.m. as I mentioned. With regard to late night drinking, there was a comment made about outdoor bar area, particularly around football events. I must stress that that is not from the Hoxton Shepherd's Bush. We do not operate a bar environment within the hotel or externally. Our existing liquor license is managed with care and compliance with all conditions, and we do not and will not be chasing a late night drinking culture or an avenue of exploration. Again, this is a restaurant that's food-led, not alcohol-led, and that's our model, and it's not going to change. I think it's important to note that we already engage with the neighbours quite regularly where possible and taking their feedback into consideration. I've been with the hotel less than a year, and in the time that I've been there, I've replaced a tree on the boundary that cost £9,000 to the hotel. All our deliveries happen past midday into the evening time, which is unusual for a hotel of our size. Even things like our linen, which we have 240 bedrooms, our linen is delivered at 6 p.m. at night time, not at 7 o'clock in the morning ahead of the day. And we do this as respect to our neighbours. We have relocated the baling compactor. We had one complaint about noise of it being used at 8:30 in the morning time. We relocated the baling compactor to further up away from the housing and is now restricted to use only between 11 and 6. From a community perspective, we support local initiatives. We are in the process of supporting a local ladies football team. I'm an active participant in the Shepherd's Bush Business Forum. We've donated a Christmas tree last year, provided hot drinks and mince pies onto Shepherd's Bush Green. And of course, this year there will be more that we want to do. As a business, we are proud of our long-standing presence in the community. We want to work with our neighbours because we are aware that these are also our neighbours and we are not just simply a business. We work with local suppliers, we employ locally, and we take great pride in being trusted and responsible neighbour. And the proposal is merely a guest experience enhancement, not a dramatic change to our business model.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leonardo. If you'd like to take your seat back in the gallery. Thank you very much for that. We will move on to questions from members of the committee. Are there any questions? No, thank you very much. And I do not have any questions either, and no objections for that matter. In that case, we'll move on to voting. First, on whether recommendation 1 in the report is agreed. Councillor Melton, will you be voting for, against, or not voting?
For.
Councillor Walsh?
For.
Councillor Pascal-Toubray?
For.
And I will also be voting for. And on whether recommendation 2 in the report is agreed, Councillor Melton?
For.
Councillor Walsh?
For.
Councillor Pascal-Toubray?
For.
And I will also be voting for, and therefore the application is approved. Thank you very much. We move on to item number 9, which is flat A, the basement of 18 Stowe Road in W12. Neil, I believe you are presenting. When you're ready, please introduce your report.
Thank you, Chair. As I say, this application relates to flat A, the basement flat of 18 Stowe Road. It's a 4-storey semi-detached property on the west side of Stowe Road. And you show that it's indicated there, the site location in the aerial photograph, highlighted in red. The site is within Collingham and Lime Grove Conservation Area. And there's just some more sort of photographs showing the rear garden area. This is the rear garden here. Just be noted that this tree has been removed. Again, this showing this would be the location of the proposed extension. The application is seeking permission for a single-story extension to the rear of the property, and it is effectively an outbuilding with a link corridor to the main house, which effectively makes it a full depth extension to the house. I'll just go through some photographs showing the garden. This is where the extension will be, and this is looking towards the rear of the site. That is looking towards the opposite direction to the north. And again, side photos. So the existing drawings show here, you can see the rear garden. There's the raised beds where the extension is, and then the existing ground floor plan as well. And there's the elevation. There is an existing, as indicated here, there's an outbuilding indicated because planning permission was granted recently, and the permission is extant for an outbuilding to the rear garden. This was a separate standalone building, and it was to be used as a home office and had a green roof. That would show the current approvals. You have the main property here and the outbuilding there, accessed along the pathway. This shows the section through the current approvals. You can see the home office. The proposed plans now, you still have a rear outbuilding which has been reduced in depth by around about 300 or 350 millimeters, and you then have a corridor linking that to the main house, and effectively then making the sort of dividing the garden and creating an extension to the main building rather than a standalone outbuilding. There are some minor alterations to the front involving planting, cycle storage and bin storage. Officers have got no objection to those elements of the proposal. This shows the floor plans. You can see the home office here, the corridor linking to the main kitchen of the site. The proposed front elevation, say we have no concerns about the alterations proposed there. And you can see here you have the home office and the link to the main building. The existing proposed home office will be about 2.5 meters in height, and the height of the link building would be around about 2.3 meters. Do a quick rear elevation or section through. The application was publicised, and we received no objections from any of the local residents. We did get a letter of support from a neighbouring property. And then during a discussion with the applicant, they have pointed out that at 46 and Stevens Avenue, which is a site within the Collingham and Lime Grove Conservation Area, was permission approved in 2007, some 18 years ago, for a similar example. I can just show you the aerial photograph of that site. I mean, in this particular circumstances, you have the rear outbuilding. The link corridor was down the side wall, boundary wall. So effectively, you know, the amenity space is not fragmented, and as such retains a sense of openness. You see again there from the aerial view, this is the outbuilding with the corridor and the open area. So officers consider that the proposed development, particularly the link to the main building, is unacceptable due to its bulk, scale and massing, be overly dominant, discordant, and would be an obtrusive development. It would negatively impact on the character and appearance of the garden setting, and the openness between the buildings of the conservation area. It's considered that the harm is less than substantial. However, this harm would not be outweighed by any public benefits. Therefore, we consider the development would not preserve the character and appearance of the conservation area, and as such, the application is recommended for refusal.
Thank you very much, Neil. We have two speakers in support of this application. Ms. Fiona Patch, who is the applicant. If you'd like to speak, you have 3 minutes.
Chair and members, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. My husband Dan and I are the co-founders of a 24-person commercial architecture practice based on Gold Hook Road. We've built both our business and our family life in the borough over the past 11 years and are grateful for the support of our ward member, Councillor Ree. We achieved, as Neil's explained, we achieved planning consent in October for the outbuilding. With a young child taking over our flat and a growing business, we felt we needed a suitable home office to enable us to continue to balance childcare and work. In October, the officer report stated that the outbuilding was considered to be of an acceptable appearance in keeping with the character and visual appearance of the application property, wider street scene, and the conservation area. We then, as you've seen, decided to apply for a fully glazed connecting corridor from what is currently our kitchen window to the outbuilding. This is to basically provide weather protection for us getting to and from the Home Office. And the structure cannot be seen from the road, the glazed structure, and it's intended to blend invisibly into the rear garden for both our benefit, it's our garden, and our neighbours. We didn't want to fall out with anyone, we all get on really well. In order to maintain the total area of garden, we reduced the outbuilding's depth by that 350 mil that Neil mentioned. Following discussions with our neighbours upstairs, we also applied for those improvements to the front garden. So it included an enclosed wheelie bin store, new railings, and a hidden cycle store that we agreed our neighbours could make informal use of. We were actually requested to omit the bin store because it was considered detrimental to the conservation area, unlike the wheelie bins. So that's actually gone from the revised application. And the target determination date for this application was the 4th of March. So it's almost getting on for 5 months later we find ourselves here. We understand from the committee report that the amended scheme is now considered to negatively impact on the garden setting and the conservation area, as Neil has outlined. We are a little bit confused that these concerns were not raised in relation to the previous application, which had that bigger solid volume across the rear of the rear garden. Letters of support have been submitted by actually 4 of our neighbours. I think there's a discrepancy in the committee report. It talks about 1 and then 3, but there's 4 now. 3 upstairs flats and our neighbour to the north. They've all welcomed our proposal. We understand the technical argument that the scheme could now be regarded as an extension as a whole and therefore could contravene HS4. But as an architect, I'm also aware that all local planning authorities and this committee specifically have previously been directed to give weight to material considerations in this type of situation. The extant consent is the fallback position, and we believe it should be a strong material consideration. The officer report fails to make mention of this. I would like to suggest, therefore, that the application is lawful and compliant with established protocol, and committee has a robust reason to approve the application should you wish to do so. We would be grateful for committee support, so basically we can continue to live and keep our growing business in the borough. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Patch. Thank you very much. We also have the ward councillor, Councillor Rowan Ree, who has asked to speak. Councillor, you have unlimited time. I have no doubt you can go for unlimited time, but we will appreciate it if you would consider to be brief.
Thank you very much, Chair. Gosh, the power. I've never been able to speak for an unlimited amount of time before. No, I'm aware that you've had a long evening already, and Fiona and Dan have been waiting for even longer for this. So I will try and be brief. Firstly, I just wanted to tackle this point about the harm, the supposed harm that this application is doing. This is a less densely massed application than the one that has already been approved, that the planning department had no problem with. it's certainly not causing any harm to the neighbours who have written in supporting this application. We heard about the one letter of support. We've had letters of support from 4 neighbours actually in favour of this development. We've also not heard about the benefits of this in the report. This is obviously a conservation area, and some of the works to the front of the property, the bit that people will actually see, will improve the visibility and make this an even nicer development than it already is. Fiona and Dan have faced enormous delays already with this application. I believe it was supposed to have been dealt with in March, and I think the fact that our planning department is choosing to spend its time and its resources trying to frustrate perfectly decent developments like this is the reason why this and so many applications in this borough seem to be delayed. We have here a young couple who are living in our borough, who are raising a family in our borough, who are working in our borough. I think this is the sort of thing that we should be encouraging rather than trying to block them through the dead hand of the state. I would urge you to accept this application and ignore the officer's recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Councillor Ree. We will move on to questions or comments from members of the committee. Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Chair. Neil, could you show me in your presentation the site context pictures? If you could go back in your presentation.
So which particular?
The one I'm looking for is the aerial shot of all of the back gardens. Yes. Sorry, if you go back one. If you go back one slide. Yeah, as I observe in this picture, as I can see, there's been a number of rear extensions, it would seem, to these properties. And if you go further again, where you look at where there's a similar proposal or a similar extension that has been granted. Yeah, I mean, as you can see, there's obviously this one, there's next door, which is a variation, or it's different again.
This one is in a different street, 46 St Stephen's.
But it sits within the same conservation area, is that correct?
The same conservation area, yeah.
So it would seem to me that it is consistent with the conservation area for there to be a variation of rear extensions already. Is that correct?
No, I mean, this is an unusual form of extension within this conservation area. I mean, the full depth extension of, effectively, the extension is linked to the house, so you have a full depth extension of the house into the rear garden. In this particular instance, they've tried to retain the openness of the garden or the amenity space by keeping the corridor to, I guess, to the boundary wall of the property. So your amenity space is still there, open and functional, and there is an sense of openness to the garden. I mean, again, I'd have to say this was approved 18 years ago, several development plans ago. So those are the only. I just thought it was only fair to show this as part of the presentation as the applicant.
If we look to the property next door to it, we can see that it's quite different again. So my point being is it doesn't seem to be within this conservation area that where extensions have taken place, that there is a sense of uniformity already. It seems that there's a variable here where people have added rear extensions.
And we would normally seek for rear extensions. We wouldn't want them to take up more than 50% of the garden, generally not within 4 meters of the rear boundary. And I think it's not more than 3.5 meters from the main wall, which is what these two properties here would comply without. They're not taking more than 50%. couldn't say exactly how far they're from the rear boundary, but they are certainly set back, and the rear garden, has got a certain amount of openness there. I mean, if we go back to the aerial photographs, you can see the gardens are open. Yes, there are some extensions. We certainly not opposed to extensions. As I say, in this instance, we approved the outbuilding. We thought that was acceptable, and to have the separate outbuilding as a home office. But when you then link that to the main property, it becomes a different type of extension. You then extend the main house out to the rear boundary, which is contrary to the conservation area guidelines and the policies.
Okay, thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Pascal Toubry.
Thank you very much. I'd like to understand, because my understanding is that the Home Office by itself is not a problem. So the only problem is the very, very small corridor that leads from the main house to the Home Office, which is, a couple of square meters. Is that the quantum of the harm?
I mean, the harm is to the open, because you are extending the main property out to the rear wall, which is contrary to our guidelines. So we're normally looking to retain the open character of the gardens in this conservation area. Had the home office been built and they were then applying for the corridor, we would still have the same concerns, because you're effectively creating a linked extension out. And if this was carried out by a significant number of people, then you would lose the entire character, the open character of the gardens for the conservation area.
Thank you very much. And what were the reasons for this being a conservation area? Because very often, this is due to the architectural qualities of the facades, or some intricacies of urban planning that are quite unusual. But as I understand it, it's very seldom about there being good back gardens. Otherwise, we'd have huge swathes of London suburbs that are conservation areas.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. So just in terms of the conservation area is broken into a number of sub-areas. So I'm just trying to open the details. Give me a second. I think the key issue is here that the properties in this portion of the conservation area is slightly different in terms of their arrangement to the property that was mentioned in that example, in terms of the mixture between terraces and linked villas. And as Neil said, I think the key issue is here that, and you're quite right, Council, when you mentioned it before, about there either being rear extensions or outbuildings, but there isn't anything where the complete boundary is completely taken up by built form, particularly in the instance where you've got these villas. And I think that's where the consideration of harm comes from, is that there is a slightly different context within the portion of where the other application was approved. It is a very difficult one on balance, because ultimately, if this were to be approved and we had similar applications come forward, we would then see the openness of the conservation area really be diminished through subsequent applications, and I think that's where the overall concern comes from, really.
Sorry, through the chair, Matt Butler, Assistant Director of Development Management. It's certainly not planning's desire to frustrate in any way residents for the sake of it, or certainly people who want to operate working from home, as this applicant has described earlier. And indeed, we're very, very happy with the outbuilding, and indeed a larger form of it. I think even regardless of this being a conservation area, I mean, it's difficult, as Councillor Pascal Toubry was trying to, I think, ask us to sort of crystallise what the real harm is here in terms of amenity or character. And it is a difficult one in this to sort of pin down as such. I mean, there's a lot going to this in terms of principle. Now, regardless of this being a conservation area, I think in any rear garden, if we had a proposal to extend full length from the rear wall to an outbuilding, even if it's just a corridor, it is a dangerous precedent, absolutely. And in terms of, if we were to understand the necessity of this, in terms of if there was, for example, some particular personal circumstances that required this, if it's just purely for convenience, perhaps not getting wet or whatever, protected elements accessing their outbuilding, it is difficult to understand how that would outweigh the potential sort of harm of this now rolling out as something that we were happy to entertain, that people would be building full-length extensions, be it the part of it, maybe a corridor through their gardens. I don't think we've given much weight at all to the one which was approved 18 years ago. If nothing else, it was against a very different set of criteria and plans, but also that it is situated against the boundary and there's an extension next door and the circumstances are different here. But as I said, I mean, it does jump out to us as officers. We're really struggling with a corridor down the middle of a garden, be it glazed, and what that is essentially setting up, both in terms of this immediate area, but in terms of wider precedent. And we are mindful that people are, increasingly working from home as a norm, and as I said, it does worry us.
But if let's say hypothetically just the Home Office were to be built, then that would be within the principles of fair development. And then if, again, totally hypothetically, the lady were to rig up a temporary arrangement of, corrugated plexiglass to prevent her from getting wet as she went to the Home Office, there's not an awful lot we could do about that in terms of planning, is there? Because that wouldn't be a development. So I'm just trying to see sort of what actually constitutes as good and bad in this area, and where the real damage to the amenities lie.
Through the chair, that is likely to be classed as development that would fall to be considered within the planning regime if they're even literally 4 sticks in the ground and chucking a sheet over it. If that's permanent, it needs planning permission. A tent in the garden isn't, because you're not going to live in the tent, you're going to take it down. It's not permanent, but yeah, quite seriously, I mean, even 4 poles in the ground and chucking a sheet, that's an enclosure, and if that's permanent, that requires planning permission.
Thank you. Any further? Councillor Melton.
Okay. I have an observation and then a question. So I know officers have, it's very good of you, Neil, to show us the previous property with a similar development. That suggests, and I think the committee's kind of voiced this confusion that it feels like a precedent was already set 18 years ago, and that we're now pushing against that precedent. If there's already been a similar construction in the conservation area already, my question is perhaps a more of a legal question. Is as a committee, is it material to our decision making to consider the merits of an individual development or the precedent that it sets for future development in an area? How do we balance those two?
That is a difficult question. You have to consider the application before you, but in a conservation area, it wouldn't be unreasonable to consider, because obviously the second application that comes forward in the same area, the same argument would arise. It would, the applicant would say, but it's already been permitted. So there could be a gradual erosion of the openness. So that, I would say, would be a reasonable consideration, the natural, the gradual erosion as a result of permitting one. You'd have to be consistent, and that is a requirement. The council has to be consistent in its approach. So unless, let's say, the second house down the road, if it comes forward with a similar application, in order to refuse that, you'd have to make out a very good case and say why that one is different from this particular application.
And to invert that, so because a similar development has already been prepared in the area, in the conservation area, it would be inconsistent of us to refuse this one.
That's correct. And my understanding from what I've heard the example given is in a slightly different location, and the officers might be able to explain why that makes a difference.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any further questions or comments?
Just a brief comment that looking up Stowe Road on the conservation area profile, the description of it seems to be entirely about the facades rather than anything to do with the gardens or the rear amenities of it.
Thank you for that. Since there are no further questions, I would just perhaps summarize my thoughts. I agree with what has been said from the applicant's point of view and Councillor Ree, and from the questions, the spirit of the questions been asked. I do not consider this to have a dominant or overbearing impact. And I think on the point about harm being, I take the point, and I think to the point of that harm is less than substantial, as Neil said, and we established the Ravenscourt Hospital item what this means. But that being outweighed, but that there's no public benefit, I think this isn't the sort of application where I would be looking for public benefits. And yet, as the applicant said, we do have the improvements to the front garden, which are not, although not public, they have, you know, contributed to having 4 letters of support from neighbours, and it's not often that we have that. I do not think that this creates a dangerous precedent. If anything, I think we created a welcome precedent when we previously approved the outbuilding, and that the residents that have a garden, if they want, obviously within the criteria we have to build there, then this will be looked at favorably, obviously within certain parameters. And for that reason, I am minded to approve the application and vote against the recommendation to refuse, at which point I think, Lynn, if you could run us through how the choreography works with voting against the recommendation.
Yes. So I think you will need to vote on recommendation 1, and if that goes against officer recommendation, one of you would have to propose a motion to approve, and giving the reasons why you've gone against officer recommendation. The officers could perhaps help you fine-tune it. You would also then need to delegate authority to the officers to attach any appropriate conditions. So you need to kind of think of a reason why you would go against the reasons given here, why it is not acceptable, and then vote on that. So, but you vote on our recommendation 1 first, and then move on to that.
Okay, in that case, we will vote on recommendation 1, which is that the Director of Planning and Property be authorised to refuse planning permission. Councillor Melton, are you voting for, against, or not voting on that recommendation? Against. Councillor Walsh?
Against.
Councillor Pascal-Tilbury?
Against.
And I will also be voting against. Therefore, that recommendation has not been approved, which means that we now need to propose a motion to approve the application.
And with the reasons.
And with the reasons. Do we have someone who would like to set out the reasons? Councillor Melton?
I would like to propose a motion to approve this planning application as it is consistent with other planning applications that have been approved within the conservation area.
Any additions to that? I would just like to add to that imagine this is the word, and as I say, we can fine tune that the committee does not consider that the harm to the conservation area is substantial, and that there is the committee does not consider that there's a overbearing impact on other properties. How is that for?
I think with regard to the conservation area, I take it is in the same conservation area, the example given, so that should be, and I would kind of also suggest, and again, officers can correct me if that's not acceptable, I would say that the fallback position is not any more harmful, if at all, than what's been proposed, because there is a fallback position. No, there is a fallback position, isn't there, which is the outbuilding. So there's not much difference between the fallback position and what is being proposed. And so in your view, it is not worse than what's already been approved?
That's right. I think that's right for the rest of the committee as well. Yeah.
And the officers could kind of fine tune that when? Yeah. And you need to delegate authority for the conditions for them to attach?
Yes. So the motion is that the application is approved on the grounds that were just described, and also that we delegate authority to the planning department officers to attach the necessary conditions.
So who's proposed the motion and who's seconding it?
Councillor Melton, you're proposing the motion, and do we have a seconder?
I'll second.
Councillor Pascal-Tilbury will second. In that case, do we vote on it? Or?
Yes.
Yeah, in that case, we'll move to a vote. Councillor Melton, are you voting for, against, or not voting on the motion? For. Councillor Walsh? For. Councillor Pascal-Tilbury? For. And I will also be voting for. Therefore, the motion is carried. Thank you very much. That brings the end of this item. We move on to our final item, which is item 10, about 21 Thorpe Bank Road. Neil, if you'd like to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. So the application relates to 21 Thorpe Bank Road, and the proposal is for the erection of a rear roof extension and the erection of a single-storey rear extension following demolition of existing lean-to and installation of 3 roof lights in the front roof slope and some new doors. The site is here, is shown here, highlighted in red. It is on the west side of Thorpe Bank Road and backs onto the Galloway Road terrace. As you can see from the plan, these properties are very small gardens, are very close proximity. The aerial photograph, the application site is highlighted in red. As you can see, the Galloway Road properties behind, a significant number of rear roof extensions in those properties. Look, and this is towards the rear of 21 Thorpe Bank. Again, you can see there's rear roof extension quite common in Thorpe Bank Road itself. This is the front elevation. This is the rear garden area looking south. You see the 2 metre high timber fence to the neighbouring property. This is looking towards the north. You can see the existing small outbuilding here and timber fence, again 2 metres high. And then to the rear of the side, facing Galloway, there's a 2 metre high wall with a 1 metre high timber fence. It has been brought to our attention by some of the objectors that the timber fence does not have planning permission, which is correct. It's not part of this application, but that is being investigated by our enforcement colleagues and will be dealt with by separately. So that's the outbuilding that will be demolished. And there's again a view with number 23 Thorpe Bank. When the application originally came in, they were intending to have the extension 3 metres high in the boundary of the neighbouring property with a flat roof straight across. There was concerns about the impact that would have on the property. So we decided to negotiate with the applicant. You can see here, small garden area. You have the small utility room being created at ground floor level, which still keeps small amenity space, but it is about 2/3 of the garden would be amenity space still. You see it would be a pitched roof, sorry, show that in a second, and then the rear roof extension, creating a bedroom and an extra bedroom. You see here the proposed extension is 2.1 metres high now, very similar to the outbuilding on the boundary with the neighbouring property, with a pitched roof then going to inside the site to a maximum height of 3 metres. That will create a storage area. And the rear roof extension is, as shown, quite a contemporary appearance. And then the storage room would have a small circular window into the amenity area. You see here that they're not raising the ridge height. It is a vertical rear face, but that is very similar to lots of the other developments in that street. And again, a section through the utility room. You see the boundary, the existing boundary wall with the neighbour is about 2 metres high, which roughly coincides with the top of the window, and the pitched roof coming away from the outbuilding. Officers are minded to recommend approval for this development. We consider that it's acceptable and seek that the committee grant planning permission for this development. We did receive a number of objections from local residents who are concerned. One about primarily about the sort of rear ground floor extension, saying that there aren't any others in Thorpe Bank Road. I mean, officers have looked on, there isn't much in Thorpe Bank Road. There are a couple of examples to the rear in Galloway where there's full depth extensions, and some covering the entire garden. And then in terms of roof extensions, Galloway Road, I think 30 out of 59 properties have them, and in Thorpe Bank, 29 out of 55 properties have rear roof extensions. So officers are comfortable and prepared to recommend approval. We assessed the impact of the ground floor extension on the neighbours behind, taking into account whether the timber fence is retained there after investigation or if it is removed, and it's considered that it would not have a detrimental impact on outlook or sentiment closure for those neighbours.
Thank you very much, Neil. Do we have any questions from members of the committee? No questions. In that case, we'll move straight on to voting. First, on whether recommendation 1 in the report is approved. Councillor Melton, do you vote for, against, or not voting?
For.
Councillor Walsh?
For.
Councillor Pascal-Toubray?
For.
And I'm also voting for. And now on whether recommendation 2 in the report is agreed. Councillor Melton?
For.
Councillor Walsh?
For.
Councillor Pascal-Toubray?
For.
And I will also be voting for. Therefore, the application is approved. Thank you very much. Thanks to everyone for attending what has been a long meeting, especially precinct officers staying late for this. The draft minutes of this meeting will be published on the website shortly. They will be formally approved at the next meeting, which is on the 16th of September 2025. And if there are any questions